I'm going to call this meeting to order of the Amherst School Committee at 6:05 p.m. This meeting, thank you, is recorded and live broadcast by Amherst Media, and we do have a member participating remotely today, so I'm just going to follow the correct procedure for having a member participate remotely. Okay, so let the record reflect that Anastasia Ordonez is attending remotely via Google Hangout on this meeting date, February 5th, 2018, because her physical attendance would be unreasonably difficult under 940 CMR 29.10. Anastasia, Ms. Ordonez, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, let the record reflect that Ms. Ordonez's attendance via video chat can be heard by all present at the meeting. Thank you. Okay. So our first order of business is to approve the minutes of January 24th, 2018. And let's see, I did have one correction. Yes.
I just want to thank Jadira Torres for filling in. Ms. Horshmullen is out this afternoon or in the evening, so thank you very much for being here.
And let's see, my one correction was on the, let's see, third page, the second paragraph down, it says the Fort River roof replacement came in at 1.3 million, and I think it's 1.9. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That was exactly my correction.
Awesome. Okay, any other comments on this before we take a motion? Or we can take a motion first?
I move to approve the minutes of January 24th, 2018.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Oh,
I think roll call because we have someone participating remotely.
thank you. Okay, we're going to take a roll call vote. So we're going to start at this end of the table.
Demling, aye.
Dwon Cage, aye.
Hazard, aye.
Nakajima abstain.
Ordonez, aye.
Thank you. So it's unanimous.
I wasn't there.
That's fine. Yeah, I got from your blank stare.
When you looked at me the first time, I was thinking that
Why
was
is he
Sarah.
doing this? Okay, so announcements and public comments. So we do have an opportunity for public comment. So if anyone would like to make any public comment, you're welcome to step to the microphone, and you have 3 minutes to speak. Anyone like to speak? Yep. You can come up. This is usually the only time we have to speak, yeah. Not right now? No? Okay. Okay, thank you. And do I have any announcements from school members? Ms. Ordonez, feel free to speak up if you have anything to say. Yes.
Thank you. I don't have anything for today.
Okay, thank you. Yeah?
Hi, I just wanted to give a brief update on the Regional School District Planning Committee.
Thank you.
So we've met a second time, and just to reset the bouncing ball for those who might not be following us so closely, the school committee recommended that we explore regionalizing Amherst pre-K to 6 with Pelham pre-K to 6. We already share a number of services. We brought that to town meeting. Town meeting approved the formation of a regional school district planning committee, which is 3 members of our town, 1 member of the school committee, which is myself, and 2 community members, Mary Lou Fallman and Joan Tenkin. And Pelham did the same thing. And the next step in this state-defined process is for those committees to vote to form a regional school district planning board together if there is mutual interest among the 2 committees. So at our last Amherst Regional School District Planning Committee meeting, we voted to form that board with Pelham. And so if/when Pelham votes to do the same, then we will start the process. And at that point, we would then sort of kick off in earnest the deep dive exploration, including a consultant who has experience helping towns through the regionalization process. And Dr. Morrison made this a good time to mention, so the consultant costs money, and we were fortunate enough to get a grant.
Sure. I'll mention briefly that we were fortunate a couple weeks ago to be awarded a grant for both districts. I applied, and you all, as well as the Pelham School Committee, endorsed the application for the Efficiency and Regionalization Grant that the state gives out, and so we were awarded a grant of $21,500 to further explore this with consultants who have expertise in doing this work in other communities, understand the laws and regulations, as well as the engagement process that's needed to fully have two communities consider the merits and the pros and cons of the regionalization effort, and also to work through some of the thornier issues. In this case, I'll editorialize. I think the financials, but particularly the governance, will be something that will need a lot of attention and engagement in both communities. So we're fortunate to have the grant, and if the Pelham committee ends up wanting to form a board, I think that'll be something that, in my role, I'm able to support interest, or whatever process the board wants to pursue around receiving support and help.
Thank you very much for that update. I am just noticing we just had a lot more people come in, and we are still in the announcements time, so I just wanted to reopen public comment in case there was anybody who would come in just a few minutes later and would like to stand up and speak. Okay, great. And so let me just, as people stand up, do need to come up to the microphone for the sake of Amherst Media, and also you have 3 minutes to speak. So please, and state your name.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Mead. I have the pleasure of teaching at Amherst College, and about half the people in the audience are students from my class. A class called Active Citizenship, and they have to go to public meetings, and these students wanted to come to the school committee.
Great, thank you. Welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lissa Pierce Boniface. I am a member of Amherst now for about 10 years, and I'm here today because I want to thank the superintendent and the school committee for creating the dual language magnet school subgroup of the enrollment working group. I am hopeful that their presentation tonight will further the discussion of developing a Spanish-English dual language program as part of the Amherst Elementary School District. I took part in the survey, which was very encouraging, and a lot of people are talking about how encouraging it was just to be asked what we wanted, that they distributed. I have met with the subgroup to discuss the research and the experience of trying to bring two languages or more into the daily curriculum of our university town. I've been working on this issue for 10 years. It's my birthday tonight, and I just want to celebrate with you all and say thank you. Thank you for bringing this to the attention of the school committee, and thank you, Superintendent, for your leadership on this issue. I appreciate your leadership, and I will continue to assist you in any way possible to make this a reality for all of our children in Amherst. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Great, okay. Anything else before you? Okay, great, thanks so much. Okay, so superintendent's update.
Sure. So it's actually in the packet, so it's slightly more organized tonight than I have been, perhaps, of actually getting in the packet and not a side note. So there's just a couple, a couple updates I wanted to share. One was already shared with you, but you may not have known it was snowed out. Anastasia, were you jumping in with a comment, or?
No,
Okay, sorry. I thought I heard something. I'm sensitive. The computer's so close.
thank you.
So tomorrow, all the district leaders and managers will be participating in a professional development workshop pretty much all morning, which is preventing and responding to harassment, particularly gender and sexual harassment issues in the workplace. It's a comprehensive training. Ed Mitnick, who used to work with MCAD, which is the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, and now has his own firm that does this both locally and nationally, but he happens to be local, which is fantastic. We're working us through a series of activities and information, so not just getting the theoretical constructs, but the functional in the moment. Something happens, and really role-playing those scenarios. Certainly has been reported all over the world in the United States. This is an issue, and it's always been an issue, but it's becoming more highlighted, and thank goodness it is. And so this is really a training for our managers so that we're aware both on the student-to-student level, staff-to-staff level, staff to student level, but particularly in the role of manager as well, who's responsible for all those things, as well as the management's role in relating to all those different groups, making sure that we have our best practices both on identifying reporting structures, making sure that there's safe spaces for staff around it, and then appropriate responses. So we're very much looking forward to having Mr. Mitnick in to support us. His experience is really long, and I'll just share that when I first called him, he was contacted through people who have worked with us in the past, actually from the Boston Public Schools. And one thing I appreciate is he's so happy to be doing proactive work, right? So, frankly, that a lot of the work that folks in his profession are getting are reactive at the moment. And so it's good work. It's work that's not new to our district. I think it has a new angle at this point and a little more focus. So that'll be happening tomorrow morning for us. Just some Amherst-specific updates. We have 2 finalists for the Fort River Principal Search, Diane Chamberlain and Emmett Conroy, and so that Friday, both of them will be at Fort River and then the district, and there'll be evening sessions for the community to come and offer feedback. And I just want to say, as always, we take the feedback seriously, and there'll be forms to fill out. And as a decision maker on that one, I read every single form, and I take all of those forms, whether it's staff. I mean, this one's more focused on the community, but there's also staff sessions in the afternoon, incredibly seriously. It's one of the most important things I do is the selection of principals. So that'll be this Friday.
Oh, yes, question.
Yeah, just briefly describe what kind of outreach you've done to like the Fort River community, PGOs and parents, etc.
Yeah, so the search process, well, I'll just speak to it, but had parents, community members, and staff members from Fort River on it in terms of selection of finalists. Since then, all families have been contacted via email. It's on our website, the Fort River website, and all staff have been contacted as well last week to give due notice. It was just about travel times and scheduling that ended up being on a Friday, which, I could argue either way, I suppose, but. And really what happens at each of these sessions, both for staff and the community, is, I'll speak to the community ones which are on the update. So there's roughly half hour. They generally go a little bit over. You can see there's a little wiggle time in there. And they're open-ended. We ask the candidates to do an introductory statement, and then whoever comes can ask any question they like to the candidates, see responses. And the feedback forms all go back to me, coded, whether it's a staff member, parent, guardian, someone from the community. And all that feeds into a decision-making process that we have. I'll meet individually with each candidate. They'll also meet with our administrative team and an interview as well. So it's a long day for the candidates, but it's a hard job, and they'll have long days in the role as well, and we feel like it's an appropriate match for that. 3 more, and I'll do these rather briefly, but this is related to the communication plan. But historically, we've had events for 7th and 9th grade students around welcome and information session. This is the first year that I'm aware of that we're doing a same event for an elementary population. So March 1st, we'll be hosting it at Crocker Farms Library. Thanks to Mr. Shea in the back of the room for use of the space. And certainly you're all invited, and we're certainly targeting, we'll be sending notices to area preschools, but we've also had a number of families get in touch with either me, myself, or the principals directly from either private schools, charter schools. So we're trying to have an informational session where anyone can come and ask questions if they're thinking about coming to our district. Mr. Harb will also be there, as food service seems to be quite important to many elementary school families, as well as Ms. Cunningham and a few others like Dr. Brady, who's here. I think the Tinkergarten event I've referenced before, so in the name of time, because I know there's people waiting, I think the last one I'll just mention is at the last Amherst School Committee meeting, there was a conversation about housing patterns in town and how it's affecting elementary enrollments and district enrollments more generally. I did talk to the town manager, and in the April School Committee meeting, and I want to acknowledge that not everyone will be with us at the April School Committee. Well, not everyone has to be at the April School Committee meeting who's with us here. They certainly are always welcome. But that was the earliest date we could figure. I wanted to separate it a bit from the budget process. I thought that was wise. So Assistant Town Manager Dave Zolmek and members of the Town Planning Department will come and give their perspective on both the history of planning and housing in Amherst, but also looking forward to what's in the plans, kind of some of the concerns that were expressed at the last meeting, be able to respond to them. So I apologize for the a little bit longer gap in time between that presentation and their response, but I didn't want them to necessarily come to a meeting where there's budget hearing and some other presentations at the same night.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just for the number one, the harassment training, I guess for the future, I think we should think about how school committee members
Yeah.
can participate in such a training, because I think it's important for us to get trained as well. So maybe separately or together.
That's a really good point. Thank you. And it'd be interesting to see if MASC has things, I mean, the role of school committee is, you are managers, but it's such a different role in terms of a non-day-to-day role. But I think that's spot on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so moving on. No continuing business. So the first item is safety school/school buildings as election polling sites. So maybe a month or so ago, I was contacted by, Dr. Morris and I were contacted by community members, parents in the community who were concerned about safety issues around the elementary school buildings being used as polling sites, and sort of what our protocols were, how that might be addressed in a way to make sure that we're really ensuring that our students are as safe as possible. So to follow up with that, Dr. Morris reached out to the Public Safety Department, so thank you very much for being here, and they are going to do a presentation. Is that correct?
So
Do
I think
wanna
we
introduce
talked
it?
beforehand. I think
Okay.
I'll share
Okay.
the results because we've spoken, and Lieutenant Johnson and the chief are here if there's any questions or follow-up.
Right. Thank
If
you.
that's okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
So the first thing, just piggybacking on the chair's comments, really appreciate the responsiveness. You know, Chief and I talked about a couple different things. A couple days later, Lieutenant Johnson was in touch with me. The next week, he was, despite some snow and some weather that got in the way a little bit, was in our schools, partially doing safety walks with our facilities director, new facilities director, but partially for this purpose. So I really want to thank the Amherst Police Department. They could not have been more responsive, more thorough in their analysis. So I'm going to say that. So I just want to go down the recommendations because we've spoken about it. This was not in the packet because I wasn't as organized with this one, but it was a handout and it's in the back of the room for anyone else who wanted to follow along. So the first one recommendation is to schedule teacher curriculum days to run concurrent with scheduled voting days. So we do that, most years. We have that in the schedule for next year. It'll be the November election day is when our curriculum day is. I think at the current time, we have more voting days than there are curriculum days. We talked to the town manager about this. There's no way to fully align our curriculum days with the voting days. So we try to pick the big ones every other year. November elections at the current time has been the biggest voting days in Amherst, but we'll continue to do that, and I think it was a good recommendation. I also agree with, you'll hear a lot of the agree because we talked, and I think it was, again, very thorough and accurate. The biggest security issue is Crocker Farm. I think I spoke to this, even the last time, that at Fort River and Wildwood with the change, thank you to Select Board for changing the voting location at Fort River based on our request to the gym. There's the gyms have multiple doors in and out from the outside, so voters can come, and they don't have to enter the building with students in them to be able to do the voting because there's enough space and there's multiple entrances and exits possible from the exterior. With the constable there, we feel really confident, as does the Amherst Police Department. I would also agree that Crocker Farm is a more significant issue. There's no space that works the same way. The gym at Crocker Farm is in the interior of the school, actually has no exterior access whatsoever. And pretty much all the large group spaces also have no exterior access. I looked at the library a little bit, only has one door in and out. So that doesn't meet the needs of the electorate and the voters. Its entrance is in a place that's not as accessible as some other exterior venues. So one of the recommendations that was made was to have a police officer present at Crocker Farm during election days. Something I have talked to the town manager about as well, and I fully endorse the recommendations the Amherst Police Department made. I think just probably one other note, and anything that either of you would like to add, please feel free, is, the PA systems that were noted at Crocker Farm in particular, that has been resolved since then. So we appreciate you highlighting some of the safety needs with where the PA system was being accessed. And since that time, we've been able to resolve that issue. And then when we talk a little bit later about facilities and MSBA process, Mr. McPherson will talk a bit about PA systems. Not that we can't take questions now, but he's coming a bit later and he'll be able to speak to that. And I think the last suggestion I want to speak to, sorry, I'm not doing this totally chronologically in terms of the order, was around parking and having clear signage, and that's something that I know I've talked to Mr. McPherson about as well. I think with where the voting is, we really want to think about where the parking is, because, you know, if you think of Fort River and Wildwood, where the gym is isn't necessarily incredibly adjacent to what people think where they're going to park. And so we already started working on some plans for our March date of where could we make sure that people had signs, having staff parking different spaces that leaves a certain number of spots available that are most adjacent to the gym spaces there. And I think it was a great suggestion that we'll have an operational plan in place for by March. Anything that either of you would like to add?
Unless there are specific questions, no, I mean, it was very easy to work with the superintendent.
Who wouldn't mind, so everybody can hear.
Sorry, Scott Livingstone, Police Chief.
Thank you.
With many, many things, it's very easy working with the superintendent and the schools in general. We cooperate on a lot of issues, not just this specific one, but you know, these are conversations that I've been having with the clerk, Ms. Burgess, for many, many years about consolidating polling sites if possible, and the overall discussion about what we could do with polling sites, because it's getting more difficult to find constables, maybe not police officers. So, you know, the possibility of having police officers in the elementary schools, if they're going to continue to be used as polling sites, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be, makes the most sense. And then I'll defer to the expert, Lieutenant Johnson, if there are any other questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Chief of Police, for being here, and for your responsiveness as the superintendent. That's very much appreciated. Any thoughts, questions from the committee with this? Yes, Mr. Dunley.
So, do you know, so with the additional officer for Crocker Farm, is that a town? Does the town pick up that expense, or is that a school expense?
I can.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we would see that as a town expense because the election is not a school event. It's something that they utilize our school, and we want to work with our town, you know, officials, but that's how we would view the expense that would come from that.
Mr. Donas, any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if either the superintendent or someone else could describe what the problem was with the PA.
I could start, but Mr. Shea, I don't know if you would. So the question was the issue with the PA that is now resolved, but what the issue was at Crocker Farm? Yeah. If that's okay with the chair, I'm sorry, I should have looked.
Derek Shea, Principal, Crocker Farm. The PAs in all of our schools functionally operate from right at the front office beside secretaries. In the Crocker Farm School for the last several months, the system was broken, and the only way we could access a PA was through a substitute system, which was approximately maybe 10 meters away in like a back closet, so you weren't actually able to actually see anything unless you went into this other closet. That would probably mean the secretary would leave the front office, no one would be sitting at the front. It wasn't the best situation. Lieutenant Johnson was helpful when he came over last week, and they managed to fix it quite quickly, but it had been out of commission for a little while. I think it's an old system, so it took some work to get it fixed.
Thank you. Yes.
So, I
I think Ms. Ordonez might have had a follow-up. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah, sorry. So the email that you had forwarded to us, Dr. Morris, had said that each school had various issues. Accessible at Crocker Farm to not being audible at Fort River and Wildwood. So thank you, Mr. Shea, for addressing the problem with Crocker Farm, but I'm wondering if the Fort River and Wildwood ones have been addressed as well?
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit, which is that the Fort River and Wild ones are not about access points. They're about volume, particularly as it relates to the quads setup, that where the announcements come in based on what's happening in the quad, it's hard to get the volume moderated correctly, because at quiet moments it can seem really loud, and at moments where you have 4 classes in a quad where there's wonderful learning that's noisy going on, it can feel really quiet. So we're trying to work on that, and certainly later when Mr. McPherson's here and share his analysis of all the buildings, he can speak in a little more depth to that.
Okay, Thank you. I'll look forward to that.
Mr. Nocini?
So I probably skipped a groove, but these are recommendations. What's the next step in turning the recommendations into something that happens?
So if the school committee, I don't think it would need a vote, but if the school committee endorsed, I would be sending a letter to the town manager and the select board indicating that, thanking the Amherst Police Department for their work, for their analysis, saying that from my position, I agree with their recommendation, particularly as it relates to Crocker Farm, and that we'd like to put that in place within the March election that's coming up in the town of Amherst.
Okay.
But I want to make sure the school committee would, assent to that or
I'm
endorse.
going to say I vote at Crocker Farm, and so I've had multiple opportunities to park, walk down the hall. If it's a busy election, stand in line, walking, down the hall. And I think the notion of having an officer located there, as well as potentially relocating a constable or rearranging, makes enormous sense in terms of giving people assurance that it's a safe environment. So I think that makes enormous sense. And it looked to me like other than parking and rearranging parking other places, the basic security pattern of Wildwood and Fort River were already well established or reestablished. So those made sense to me too.
Ms. Monication?
Sure. Can you explain the difference between a police officer and a constable in terms of uniform? And also, I'm glad Mr. Shea Principal Shea is here, because I think we've had some conversations offline, online about police presence in the schools, and I want to make sure that parents and children are notified that this is going to happen, and the police are there to protect them, since in Amherst we aren't a school or a district that has law enforcement regularly in the schools.
Want to speak to the constable piece first?
Sure. So constables were the original police officers dating back to the 1700s of common law. And there are still many of those laws on the Massachusetts general law books. However, constables in today's age have no police powers and no arrest powers, and sometimes they don't even have uniforms and stuff. And what we've been finding is with 12 precincts, I think we have now, and 10 polling sites, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find people who we can swear in as constables, educate them on what their responsibilities are at polling sites, and they're really, most of the responsibilities lie with answering questions, making sure people who have signs are where they are supposed to be, and just making sure people are paying attention to the rules and stuff. So again, going back, having discussions with our clerk about probably might not be a bad idea to just start having police officers working poll sites more frequently because they're available. It's just mostly convenience. So.
And do you want me to answer the one about communication, or would you like to, Mr. Shea? Okay, yeah. So I think it's a spot-on point that we don't regularly have police officers unless it's a specific event around it, like I know the community breakfast sometimes, probably annually, I would say, right? Amherst Police Department comes. So we'd want to make sure that we inform families, particularly in this scenario where we relate to Crocker Farm. I think it's actually a good idea because this election probably will draw a lot of voters just around parking and just being cautious about, you're going to see different, perhaps traffic patterns for parents who are dropping off their children. So I think there's a broader communication that will work for all our elementary schools. And if the town does decide to place a police officer during the time when school's in session at Crocker Farm, a specific mention of that to the Crocker Farm community. I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and I just have a clarification because I am a Crocker Farm parent and I do spend a lot of time at that preschool entrance. So in terms of that time when there's a pickup transition and you have kids waiting to come out and kids leaving, and how actually does the entry work with the voters as they come in? Are they coming in that preschool entrance? And is it happening simultaneously?
Lieutenant Johnson. Where the entrance for the Crocker Farm School voters is right at if you know where the entrance to the preschool is,
right
in that corner.
Yeah.
So if preschoolers were at the same time exiting, I think they do exit from that door.
Yeah.
So there is that cross pattern and that same dual use of that door.
So there is dual use at some
Yeah,
time. Okay.
and then the voters are directed down the hallway to where they enter the gym, which is another open space where they may interact with students.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you again so much for being here, for your work on this. Any other, yeah?
Yeah, so first of all, just two other things, one comment and one check in. So I want to also thank the community members who raised this to yours and my attention. This is how it's supposed to work, right? There's a concern, it's raised, rely on public safety officials to do a full vetting of the situation, and we bring it back here. So I just want to kind of thank folks. I know some people may be in the audience or watching on TV who raised the issue. I just want to thank them for it, and Mr. Shea, who's been in touch with me frequently about this. And so the check-in is just making sure that the committee's comfortable with me authoring a letter, an email, which I'll certainly share with you. I'd want to do it on the sooner side, given that the election cycle, I'm not sure we want to wait till the next Amherst School Committee meeting. But it's really just reiterating, we support the recommendations of the Amherst Police Department. I don't think it would be anything novel or new, but I want to make sure that the committee's comfortable with that.
Okay, so with the committee's permission, I'd like to just sort of get nods of assent if everybody's comfortable. Yep. Ms. Ordonez? Yes? Nodding? Okay,
She
great.
is.
Yeah, so we are.
Virtual none.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll make sure that gets copied. Probably in the next week, I'll get that out.
excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Moving on. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we did.
Thank you.
Okay, great. B, so my big item on the agenda tonight. We have the dual immersion enrollment working group presentation. I'm also a member of that group, so I think, go team. I'm going to go sit with the group so that I'm sort of part of that group. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking if Anastasia was here, she might chair it, but she's not here, so I can try to do, what would be the most smooth way to do this?
I make a recommendation.
Yes,
I think
yes.
Mr. Demling is the secretary of the
Yes.
group, who would be next in line for chairing.
You're like the designated survivor. over there.
If anything does happen to the chair and the vice chair, God forbid.
Mr. Dudley, would
right
you be
here.
comfortable chairing while I am sitting in the
Sure.
front of the
Do you
room?
mind if I chair by sidecar over here?
No,
Is that-
I'm comfortable.
I mean, you gotta,
All right.
you gotta give them
I'll
this.
give you the gavel.
Oh, wow.
See how it feels.
I don't have one of these at the Regional School District Planning Committee, so.
All
For when
right.
Phoebe gets out of line.
Yes,
That's right.
exactly. Yes.
Okay, I think we've got it. All right.
So maybe I'll do an introduction, give you a
Yes.
chance to get over. So my quick introduction, particularly for those folks who may not have been following, is that we had an enrollment working group that got formed last summer. They look at some of the enrollment challenges that our district has faced. And there was 5 subgroups that where the group was formed, and the group itself selected the topics to study. So the committee's received presentations, and myself received presentations from a group looking at socioeconomic balance between the schools. We've received a report from a group looking at special education. We've received a report from a group looking at declining enrollment. This is the 4th presentation, which is on dual language. And the final presentation, which we're hoping was going to be tonight, but the group needed a bit more time, which is fine and probably good for our agendas, is looking at preschool access. And so this is the 4th of 5, but we really appreciate the work and effort that this group put in, and thank you for sending it out. Hopefully people were able to read it. When I got the report yesterday, I forwarded it off to the committee, as well as the many appendices and incredible amount of work that this group did. And I got a chance to meet with the group last Wednesday. It was Wednesday, something like that. And again, just very excited and impressed with both the caliber of the group, but also the unbridled enthusiasm the group has, and the really thorough look they took at what are some possibilities for us to explore in the Amherst Public Schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to the subgroup. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. We're really glad to be here. We wanted to start just by introducing ourselves and our connection to the district. My name is Margaret Sawyer. I'm the mother of a first grader at Fort River, and my daughter is 3 and rising.
I'm Phoebe Hazard. I'm the chair of the school committee, Amherst School Committee. I'm also a parent at Crocker Farm of a first grader and a 3rd grader.
Hi everyone, I'm Mickey Gromacki, and while I work in the region as an assistant principal here at the high school, I'm actually in this group as a parent because I have a kindergartner and a 2nd grader at Wildwood.
My name is Irene Hobne. I'm a parent of a Wildwood 2nd grader.
And it's been a really great process being on this team, and we're glad to be here tonight. We also want to thank the 5th member of our group, Andrea Battle. She's a grandmother in the district with years and years of history and experience in education. And also give a special thanks to Lissa Pierce-Boniface, who really helped us with some of the research and elements for the report. So let's see.
So we were tasked with looking into the possibilities of a dual language program here in our district. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some of those terms first. What is dual language? Research on some of the benefits to students and how dual language might particularly benefit us in closing the achievement gap with English language learners. We did a community survey with over 200 parents. We'll talk about the results of that. We'll talk about some of the other work that other people we talked to in connection to this report, and also think with you a little bit about some of the logistics and other considerations for the school committee to have on your minds. Some of these definitions we needed to learn too. We were kind of kicking around immersion and dual language all kind of interchangeably. We learned that dual language is the term used for when two languages are used in classroom instruction. And it's different from sort of a little bit of extra Spanish language or other language in the classroom. This is where you're really teaching all of the instruction in two languages. Dual immersion refers to the groups of students who are in the classroom. So dual means that there's two linguistic groups of students present in the classroom. And then the 50-50 model is the model that we particularly got to know in our research. It's where instruction time is divided 50% between the two language groups, two languages. And in some parts of our work, we were looking at the possibility of a magnet. And we defined magnet as a district school with a designated theme that doesn't have a specific enrollment zone. We are the third group of Amherst community members in the past 15 years who've researched and brought forward a proposal to have a Spanish-English dual language program in Amherst. There were other reports brought in 2005 and in 2009. We were proud to work with some of those folks and learn from them and grow from their good energy. Since then, there continues to be strong interest in having dual language programming. There have been some legislative changes that make bilingual programs easier to implement, just last fall. Also, we have more Latino students here in our district, 21.8% identifying as Hispanic. Of course, not everyone speaks Spanish in the home, but the numbers have grown up from 10%. And there is still a significant achievement gap between our ELL students and their peers. Families in our district also, another reason to be thinking about this is that many families are sending their children to a local language immersion charter school, which makes us think that having our own program would help to retain some of the families.
So what our group was able to do was confirm that, in fact, there is an achievement gap among students in the elementary schools. And so if you go to the Department of Education website, you'll see the performance levels, that very significant gap between all students and students who are identified as ELL and former ELL. So like everyone's been indicating, we have found that the research really, the cornerstone research that we, thank you, got from Lissa Pierce-Bonifaz is the Collier and Thomas research from 2004. But what we thought we would note is that in 2010, the state of North Carolina had contracted with those researchers to conduct a longitudinal study on their dual language programs. And what they found is that the students in those programs did have higher math and reading scores, and in some cases actually higher than monolingual English-speaking students. We also looked, and you'll find our report is dense with the research, and certainly the 2005 and 2009 reports also have a lot of research, so we were just pulling out the highlights. We also saw the improved academic ability for all students. Studies showed improved performance by dual language students across subject areas, and this research was Lindholm and Leary in 2016. And what we're also noticing in this country is that there is a significant increase in the number of dual language programs. If you see in the year 2000, there were 260, and by 2011, which we know is 7 years ago, there were more than 2,000 dual language schools.
So, in order to gauge the
what was the community thinking. We launched a survey through the school. We launched it out. We communicated through PGOs, principals' websites, sent email to the collaborative of the preschools to try to gauge as much information from the pre-K families as well. We had it in English and Spanish. We gave some copies to ELL teachers to distribute in person, and we had also a small focus group to get feedback from language speakers families. So what we found was, so this is, here we're going to be presenting some of the summary of all the responses in the package that you receive. You have also, we separated the responses from pre-K and K because those children would be most likely impacted, whereas these ones correspond to the whole spectrum of pre-K to 6th grade. So we had 279 responses, represented about 300 children. 49% were from families with children in the pre-K or kindergarten. 73% of the respondents reported being very or somewhat interested in their child attend a theme-based magnet school. There was a strong support about having a Spanish language instruction as part of K-6 programming. So this were two separate questions, whether Spanish and also attend the magnet schools. 58% one item here, 58% of respondents reported that they have considered sending their child to a school outside the ARPS. And most of those would say we would reconsider if there was a dual Spanish-English program in the district. When we look at the open-ended comments at the back, we left open for suggestions and comments. If we looked, and there was overall 65% in favor of dual immersion magnet. There were some concerns about 23% of those comments. So out of those 159 responses, there were some concern about having a magnet dual immersion program, but they still wanted this languages in the district. And only 4% of those comments say we are not interested in languages or magnet school. But this is not, the percentages is out of the responses, not of the overall numbers. There were a number of questions raised. We summarized some of them that the district should tackle because I think there was some confusion about some of the definitions. Maybe we created the survey, we are not professionals, so there was some confusion about some people have some concern, didn't understand what a magnet was versus a charter or what was the financial implication. So there's a lot of these questions that we have in the report that the people want should be clarified from why we're looking only at Spanish, what would be the infrastructure requirement that we would have to have. So all those things are, I think we were beyond our scope and we couldn't explain everything, but these are the feedback that we got from the community are in these questions. We also had more feedback. Many times we got feedback from informal conversations with other families that they did not get the survey because they were not part of the school community, the children at age, but they are interested in collaborating and they wish that there was this program in the community.
And I just wanted to add that I believe that one of the people who reached out to Mickey, is that right, was a former ELL student in our district, now in his 20s, who was very enthusiastic and passionate about this idea as being an option for the district. Okay. Additional work our group did in preparing for this report. So we just wanted to also note some other things that we did in order to reach out and get more information, sort of some more context. A number of our members, including myself, were able to go down and visit the Joseph Metcalf Elementary School in Holyoke. It's an elementary school, pre-K. Currently, it's pre-K through 3. They're in their 3rd year of being a dual language magnet school, and they are planning to go up through 5th grade. And so we were able to. We had a really excellent conversation with the principal. She was extremely enthusiastic about how the program was working, the level of achievement of their students, how it was working a really big element of what she spoke about was the culture of the culture of the school, how much it fostered this community that was all about embracing bilingualism and embracing biliteracy. That was a really big point, the idea of biliteracy. You're not just learning both languages in terms of speaking, you're learning, you're reading, you're writing, you're processing, you're literate, equally literate in both languages. So that was really wonderful, and she was very enthusiastic about helping us with anything we needed going forward. We also were in touch with, as we said earlier, with community members who had worked on previous proposals. We met with them. That was really helpful. We have a lot of amazing experts in this community that are an incredible resource. So thank you again, particularly Barbara and Lissa, and members of our district, and we're very lucky to have that. A concern of ours was that on our survey that the voices of parents, families with children who are ELL Spanish speakers was not represented sufficiently enough to really get a sense of how that community might feel about this concept of a dual immersion school. So that is dual language. So going forward, that's going to be a recommendation that we have to make sure that is a part of our community that is really targeted for more information. But we did hold a small focus group for Spanish-speaking families to get some feedback. We had 2 families come with a very enthusiastic response. And for both, if any members or community members are more interested in any of these, in our substantial report and appendices, in the appendices you'll find a full write-up of notes from Metcalf and notes about the focus group. So there's a lot of information there. Okay. Why design and offer a Spanish-English dual language program in Amherst? So this is basically sort of where we have come down. As Nikki said, the research really suggests that this model benefits all students. We're currently losing families to a local immersion charter school. In 2018, that's projected to cost our district over $1.5 million. So that really is a financial consideration as we consider what kind of options people have and how that might affect choices that we're making about our district. And this increased expense, of course, impacts our budget and could contribute to reduced offerings for all our students when the district has budget challenges. So it really is a financial impact. We do have a achievement gap with our ELL students, and research shows that this model is actually the only model that has been demonstrated to be able to close that achievement gap. And there's some really excellent graphs in your packet that demonstrate how pronounced that is. So sorry to jump around a little bit, but I get very excited. But the sort of definitive report on this, the Thomas and Collier, it's called The Astounding Effects. And it's astounding, and you read it and you just are really blown away. Let's see, our survey data and informal feedback suggests strong community support for a dual language program in Amherst. And this is a growing practice in districts across the country, and there are resources available to support districts in this work. And I know Dr. Morris has had the opportunity to reach out to some to resources that may be able to help us going forward if we decide that this is a direction we want to consider. Okay, so we just wanted to, in the sort of the last part of the report, it talks about, what are the next steps that we would recommend. So logistical considerations, of course there may be more, but this is what we came up with. First of all, if we're going to do this kind of initiative, we really have to consider how it can be cost neutral. We obviously are not in a place where we can put a lot of new money into something, but this does seem like this is an initiative that could be done using staffing that we already have, using resources. We would have to put out some initial output for resources, but there's a lot of potential for that to be possible. How can this initiative accomplish its goals without changes that cause community disruption? How can this be something where people who want to do this, who may want to do this, may have the opportunity, people who don't need to, and it doesn't end up being something that causes a lot of divisiveness or strife within the community. Implications for staffing, what does that look like in terms of who our staff is now? What does that look like as we have attrition and new hires? implications for transportation. Of course, if you're looking at something that is a magnet outside of enrollment zone, that has major implications for transportation. Curriculum and resources, what do we have? My understanding from various conversations is that there's curriculum in a box somewhere, so that, there's that, but there's also what would that look like in terms of research and going forward. Would the program be available to students in Pelham? That was a question that came up. Could the dual language strand be developed within a school, for example, 1 class per grade? So is this something that could be part of a school as opposed to a whole school? And could this initiative have positive implications for other areas of identified enrollment challenges, socioeconomic balance, declining enrollment, special education, and preschool? And from what we did, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had there. We've already, when the declining enrollment group presented, they already sort of put this out there as something that they could see as a potential for addressing some of the issues they're seeing. So I think there's a lot of sort of dovetailing that could happen with these issues we're seeing. Okay, educational considerations. Special education needs is a big question. How does this include it? It certainly does not. There was a lot of concern that this would exclude students with special education needs. That certainly is not the model that, when we looked at other models, we would consider. So that's a big conversation. Access and priority, would we ensure access and priority for EL Spanish-speaking students? Ensuring the needs that EL students are met and that we're in compliance. What are the programmatic trade-offs? Whenever you introduce something new, you're talking about, are there things that you have to possibly give up as a result of that? So that's the reality that as we go forward, if we're going to look at this. Equity of offerings in the district and the high community interest in elementary world language for all students. So, big, as we talked about this, what we could see potentially being a concern with that, a lot of people would be interested in this, and there may not be room for everybody who's interested in it to be part of it. There is a lot of interest in language across the curriculum. That is a pretty large, high price tag expense, if that was something we were going to consider. But we do need to sort of have that conversation be part of that. What are there possible steps or pathways to expand language? If this program is successful, are there ways we might consider it expanding in the future? And also, so if, as this initiative is explored, really engaging families of EL Spanish-speaking students, engaging the full community, making sure this is really something that people have an opportunity to weigh in on, to ask questions, to understand, to share their thoughts. Partnerships with higher education institutions. We have so many resources in the area, and also opportunities for community and students to get involved. Okay, and that's the end of our presentation, where we are right now. So I think now we're going to open it up to questions, comments from the committee.
Thank you. You did a really good job, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'll take my first ever gavel moment to say, I read the report that Dr. Morse emailed us before the meeting, this 22-page report that covers a tremendous amount of research and survey and the additional focus groups and trend analysis you did. I just want to thank the whole group for the tremendous amount of effort and work. I think you really went above and beyond the call of duty with this. I think the initial sort of spec with these enrollment working groups was do sort of a overview flyby to then provide us the next opportunity if we want to do a deep dive. I think you've already done at least half the deep dive, which is tremendous. If this is something we choose to pursue, I think it's a great accelerant. And it's really exciting to read through the work. I mean, there was one section in here I thought was actually kind of poetic, where you talk about people with 2 languages see that the world does not revolve around each of them, but that in the solar system they all revolve around something more universal. I thought that was really nice, and tying that into the community support and interest and passion in being a sanctuary city in this day and age, and the evolving demographics in our town. It's just really right in line, I think, with the district's mission. So I was really excited to see that. So a specific question I had on the research, it seemed like there was the implication that this research wasn't just happening within the last few years, that this is a growing and sustained body of research, which I think is important. So I don't know if you could speak to that. And the other thing I think you touched on a couple of times, but if you just had any more detail, what the research over time says about benefits to to English speakers, to non-native speakers in the non-English language. That is.
I mean, like I said, we're certainly not the experts on it. There wasn't a whole lot that we found that didn't point back to that, and I do have the name of it, The Astounding Effectiveness of Dual Language Education for All. And that was in the NABE Journal of Research and Practice, NABE. And I think that what we wanted to look at was, so if that research was done in 2004, where has the practical application of that been, and are they seeing consistent results? And so that's my piece. I know that we're the group, but
Right.
I think that in terms of if you'd like to go deeper into the research, the groups before us, we really drew upon their work. And it is interesting because it just feels like that's the cornerstone study, that everything has come from there. Is there something I'm missing, perhaps?
Just say something.
Is it okay?
Sure.
Okay.
And she did a PhD.
I do. I have a
All right,
PhD,
just
and
introduce yourself.
my name is Dr. Alice Elizabeth Pierce Boniface, but people call me Lissa. And I have a master's degree from George Mason University, which is the place where Virginia Collier teaches, and she was my advisor. So I have been working on this for 30 years because she brought this research to our classroom. So I can just tell you that she looked at tons of school records and looked at all these different programs. Now she used a standardized test to say whether someone was being successful, but her idea was that if students are performing at the 50th percentile, they're going to pass the grade, they're doing fine. And what she found is those students that were in bilingual programs from kindergarten all the way to 9th or 10th grade were actually doing better than actually just monolingual mainstream kids. So they were actually, at a higher level cognitively than even just regular mainstream kids. So there's been more research since then, but really everyone seems to keep going back to Collier and Thomas, which is like the old but good research, because it just had so many records to it. Does that answer your
Yes,
question?
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Other questions?
Anastasia?
Yeah, so I also just wanted to thank the group for doing such an incredible amount of work. I had a big smile on my face because I think that the 22-page report was actually surprising, but pleasantly surprising. So I thank you for all of that. I guess I was really struck by some of the comments that you collected from the parents, or from the respondents in the survey. In particular, there were two comments. One person had said being bilingual should be the norm in today's world, and there was another one that was in Spanish, actually, that basically said that it's time that Amherst thinks about creating an immersion program in English and Spanish. And this was a Spanish speaker who had responded, and I completely agree with those sentiments. I think it's important for us in this modern world. And one could arguably say it throughout our entire history, right? People who are bilingual or who are monolingual, who are multilingual, actually have an advantage because they can communicate with that many more people, they can explore that many more ideas, and it strengthens their educational benefits in so many different ways. So I think the research is very, very clear on that. What I would like to say is I think, given a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with right now, both from an infrastructure perspective, but also just from our budgeting perspective, that if we were to move forward, I'm wondering if the subgroup and or the superintendent have thought about what a planning process might look like. And of course not, I don't expect that anyone would have thought at this point through all the different details, but just thinking about, how we might go about putting together a plan that the school committee can respond to, the community can respond to, and that we can really start to explore this in earnest.
So my response is a little more global than just the dual language subgroup. So I don't know if you'd prefer me to respond now or to wait for more comments that are more narrowly about the dual language. Because
Ms. Adjourn, are you comfortable waiting for Dr. Morris to pitch his idea at the end?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
So,
Dr. Jim.
yeah, I'll add my thoughts. I mean, first, obviously, it's been well stated that this is an exceptional body of work, and I think my expectations, similar to what Mr. Demling said when the group was formed, was that a lot of really good work would be done, but not necessarily something this thorough, comprehensive, and well detailed. Probably some people, but a lot of people in the audience remember back. I don't know what it is now, 20 or 25 years ago, when there was like a war on what at that time was traditional English language instruction.
2003.
And there's sort of an English-only bias, including even in our dear progressive state of Massachusetts. It was caught fire in the similar to California and other places. And I remember at the time being less well-educated than this, which is why it's kind of cool to have this, was that I thought that was one of the most ignorant things I'd ever heard, because the aspiration we should have as a society is to have everyone be bilingual or multilingual, and that the concept of looking at individuals in our society and devaluing their experience instead of acknowledging it as a strength and finding ways to embrace and build upon it was profoundly troubling to me then. The neat thing is, and my dad's an immigrant whose English language was secondary to him, and after 60 years of being in this country, sometimes when they're talking to him, it still is very clear. Sometimes he's thinking in Japanese first before he speaks in English. And so, my point simply is just I have a personal awareness of family and people who are operating and learning and acculturating in different languages. And my primary view has been something that this embraces, which is that it's not a weakness, it's a strength. And if we can organize our curriculum and our programs in a way that embrace that model, all children will benefit from it. And the fact that you've taken the time to live in the research or start living in the research, that in fact there's an enormous body of evidence that that's also true for all students, or most all students, I guess, is extraordinarily valuable for us, because it means we're not starting from, if you were piloting something completely, then you'd say, well, we should do it, but boy, this is going to be really rough. If you're in a position where there's already a pretty strong body of evidence, curriculum, practice that you can draw upon, it makes it easier to think about embracing it without minimizing a lot of the challenges that come to it. So actually my last point, so I congratulate you enormously, but also I think it points in the right direction. And I think also setting aside even just the competitive notion of area schools and where Amherst is situated, I also just think that I was actually horrified to realize, since I grew up here, some people know, I was actually horrified to realize that we didn't have world languages being instructed thoroughly, because when granted it's a million years ago, but when I was a kid, you did. So I remember taking Spanish when I was in elementary school. And so to me, it's something that absolutely ought to be taught, but then finding a way to do it even better than that, finding essentially like a 21st century way to really embrace and engage a curriculum around the rich experience. Because also, again, it's not just you studied languages, it's not just about studying language, really literacy and embracing something you also pointed out, which I really loved, is the structure of thinking, of culture, of literature, of really living in the language, as opposed to, not to minimize it, but simply studying grammar essentially and spitting back phrases, is such an advance in value that I think it's great. And even better, this is going to echo something that I think Mr. Donia said a moment ago. You also laid out a lot of really great questions, because if we're going to try to do this, you wouldn't want to develop a new dual language magnet school, or otherwise how you want to call it, if we felt that in some ways it was diminishing the experience or resources of the elementary schools. It wouldn't be fair, but it wouldn't be right. There's also a question of how to, I think identifying the question of ensuring that services are available, and inclusion of students who have special needs is obviously really critical. I mean, you laid out a bunch of them, so I'm not going to go over them all over again. My point is, I think, one, simply identifying the fact that you can embrace the concept and want to work on it and want to take it to the next step, without also saying that there aren't very significant hurdles and things to work through to make it functional and figure out how, even whether based on that, but I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just simply saying there are serious enough issues about how that phasing and whether and what the resources are and how to do it become very important questions that, again, echoing something Mr. Jones said, I'm very interested in thinking about, and I can see the interrelationship with some of the other working groups. So thinking about how we're going to do, how we would take the next step to kick the tires on doing this, but also how to do that in a way that doesn't feel like it's its own 10 or 15-year conversation.
Yes.
But there's a way of seeing decision points and building action and building support would be wonderful. And I realized that was really long, but similarly, I got this stuff over the transom, started reading through it, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I'm excited to talk about it.
Any other comments or questions?
I do.
Stormy Kate?
Sure. I am really appreciative of all the volunteers that have invested so much hours and time and energy and expertise. Usually when we do like this study, probably could have cost us a lot of money. So thank you, Dr. Morris, for having this idea to pull this off successfully. I'm really struck by the statistics, how our Hispanic Latino population in the Amherst school district has doubled, right, in 18 years. From 2010, it was 10.5%, and in this year, it's at 21.8%. And overall, I believe students of color are over 50% of our Amherst school district. As a parent, I would choose something like this for my children, and they're not in elementary school. Well, the last one is not going to be in elementary school by next year, but I don't want this another study like this to happen in another 5 years or another 9 years. I really want us to think about how to implement this in people's lifetime, in their at least, and it's unfortunate, but I really want to also note that in town meeting and being in town meeting for the past couple of years, people always raise their hand and question us as a district, what are we doing? We missed the boat. The charter school opened up nearby, taking some of our students. And so I think this is the right type of investment that we should be thinking about in terms of expenditures, and to explore if there are grant opportunities, funding opportunities out there to help us pilot something in our district. I also want to mention that perhaps this is the type of systemic change that we would need to change the culture of our institution to be really, equity focused in a real way that might help us along as a district. I think, lastly, I want to talk to the role of our state, our government, our state legislature, and their progressive piece of legislation with regards to increasing language opportunities for our children. And I'm really, thankful that we're not, in a different space once upon a time when we were talking about killing bilingual education and having to get rid of that. So I just wanted to be thankful about that, and congratulations again for excellent work.
Yeah, so the last, before I turn the mic over to you, Dr. Morris, so you can address this if you want, but one sort of really big picture thought I had was I was really struck by a number of the stats here, but one of them was 73% of respondents reported being very or somewhat interested in having their child attend a theme-based magnet school. So not specifically asking just about dual language, but theme-based magnet school. And then there was another description of a theme-based magnet school. The magnet program could also function as a strand, very evocative term, a strand within an existing school where a percentage of the school population elects to participate in a thematic program. And maybe as you give us your thoughts in addressing Mrs. Ordonez's question, just the general idea of wonder if you or other leaders in the district have thought of this idea of strands within an existing school of themes, and whether this makes us think about other things, because there's other types of themes, whether it's STEM or arts or nature or all sorts of ways to go in terms of education. So
thank you. Yeah, I'll start with two quotes, and then I'll get into detail. So one, so Sonia Nieto, Dr. Sonia Nieto, many of you know, you looked at her book last time, actually, Affirmative Diversity. She had this great quote, and so I hope I get it exactly right, but if not, I apologize to Dr. Nieto, which is monolingualism, I already messed it up. Monolingualism is a disease with a known cure. So I sort of like that because it really reframes the conversation, and it's one that, much to the chagrin of my wife, her first words were not in English, I fall prey to. The second one is by Mr. Shea, who's in the back of the room. So he has a comment, and his is thinking about soccer. But I'm going to transition it to this topic, because over half the world's children, and I've been doing my own research, I've been rooting for this group because I like all the groups, but they've been great about sharing information with me throughout, so I've been doing my own work, which I'll share in a bit. And over half the world's children are raised multilingually, I should say. And so Mr. Shea has this comment about the world's interest in soccer, which the world can't be wrong, right? This isn't a unique thing to this. In the United States, in terms of many countries, quote unquote developed or not, have this very low level of bilingualism. And that's shifting. Some of that's based on immigration patterns, some of that's based on increasing dual language schools, whether they're Immersion or not. So I just wanted to share those quotes because I think I want to support the work that the group did and the value of it with those. Taking a step back from just this group, if it's okay for a second to get back to Mr. Donet's question more deliberately. So we have 4 of the 5 working groups, subgroups have now presented, and I want to talk a little bit about path forward, and I've shared this with the chair, who I know is now in a different seat. But February 27th, again, I think the preschool group will present. If not, it'll be March 13th, but we'll have that report in place. But on February 27th, which is the next meeting of the Amherst School Committee, I've been in touch since this group started the work with a woman named Phyllis Hardy. So she's the executive director of MSBA, which used to be Massachusetts, now it's the Multi-State Association for Bilingual Education. To the law that was referenced both in the report and Ms. Duamini Cage referenced, they were significant, let's see the right noun to use, they were heavily involved, I'll just say, in the making and passage of that law, both in an advocacy role but also in a policy role. They are the resource in New England who supports districts going down this road. Ms. Hardy actually has been working with our district in other realms, working with Dr. Brady and some of her staff and Ms. Richardson about dual needs students, not about language immersion or dual language programs, but actually around how do we respond to the increasing number of students we have who have both ELL needs and special needs. So she's already been working with us a bit. So I invited her to come to the meeting on February 27th, not to talk about what a program should be in Amherst, but to really follow up on this presentation with more focus on the research to Mr. Demling's question, also her experience being part of multiple beginnings of dual immersion or dual language, programs in New England. So she agreed to come, and the way Ms. Hazard and I talked about doing it, a little different than our typical meetings, was that she would make a presentation that'd be questions from the committee, but also that she'd open it up for about 20 minutes, half an hour for questions from the community. So it would feel a little more like a forum and a little more interactive than our typical structures at school committee meetings. So she's agreed to come. On Saturday, I'm attending a meeting of that group, other leaders in other districts in New England who meet on a regular basis, and they're actually focused on groupings. So some of the meeting on Saturday is focused on groupings. So I'll be in Worcester on Saturday finding about what people are doing along those lines. Another thing that I've started to work on is identifying Massachusetts and also MSAN districts, which I'll slow down in a second, but that have dual language programs. I will say that so far my research has shown that MSAN, for folks who don't know, MSAN is the Minority Student Achievement Network, so it's a national network of generally high-performing school districts that have fair amounts of diversity of a whole variety of measures. Most of the focus typically is on race, ethnicity, and language status, but that's not exclusively. So I've been doing research on districts both in Massachusetts and MSAN. MSAN tends to be districts more similar to ours than the Massachusetts districts. Massachusetts districts tend to be, not to get too far ahead of myself, tend to be in either truly urban areas or incredibly suburban areas, less so in whatever we are. Whereas MSAN districts, which are fit that whatever we are, actually almost half of MSAN districts have dual language immersion or dual language programs in them, a couple immersion, mostly just dual language. And I was on the phone today actually with 6 or 7 finding out how's it going, when did it start, but also about this point about strands, school within a school and how that is structured. And they're learning about different laws. I mean, fascinating discussion with Arizona for another day, a school in Arizona in our network, about how they do their lottery, right? And whether it's truly a magnet or if it's a hybrid or if it's a neighborhood school that has it in it, right? Trying to get as much information as I can on that, because I know there's a large community interest, again, to repeat what was already said, high quality peer-reviewed research plus strong community interest. My opinion is we have to take this, quite seriously. I also was moved, and it was noted before, by the factor about not just the academic impact, but the socio-emotional impact on a growing population in our schools. I heard that today when I talked to multiple districts this morning, that yes, they talked about some of the benefits and challenges of that, of implementing such a program, but it wasn't just on the academic side. A lot of it was socio-emotional acknowledgement of culture in a different way than one can happen in a monolingual school, which I knew, but it was different knowing it or assuming it and hearing it from leaders in different districts. So my plan in terms of full response to the groups would be February 27th, having Phyllis Hardy from MSBA come in, make a presentation to the school committee and the community that evening. The next school committee meeting Amherst School Committee meeting is March 13th, and actually at that meeting I'd like to have a more comprehensive response to all of the enrollment working group subgroups, not just all due respect to the group that's here tonight. I think on maybe the second to last slide, Ms. Hazard spoke about perhaps some potential connections between some of the positive benefits of these. Thank you. That one, the last bulleted point on that slide. I think to Eric's, Mr. Nakajima's point, just because things are good ideas don't mean they end up happening nor benefiting children. So a lot of the work that I feel like I need to do, not to have everything resolved by March 13th, that's not a goal of mine, but have enough where I can put forward some real clear thoughts on potential pathways and processes to move forward. Just looking up there, I found a district that had spent a lot of money for a report that wasn't as good as I think this one, to Mr. Demling's point earlier. They had the price point in the newspaper article that I read, and they're stuck, right? So their report was from 2015, and they're stuck not on the interest or enthusiasm, they're stuck on the other parts, the logistics, where it's located, why it's located a certain place, and it's causing a lot of community friction to be continuing to be in that place. I think one of the things I heard today from one of the districts, the MSAN districts I spoke to, was, at the end of the day, we had to make a decision where it was going to be. And this district is starting its second school now. So they started a school 4 years ago in one of their elementary schools, larger district than us, but not wildly larger. And it was really successful, and they're able to replicate that success. But starting small, focused, with enough ongoing support for staff and the community, that's what I continue to hear from every district about what was successful. And the couple districts I spoke to where it's been rockier, it was trying to go broad really fast. We're trying to upend lots of systems that people rightfully felt very tied to. And those are the districts that either it's not successful or it's getting scrapped or it never got off the ground. Because I did talk to some MSAN districts where I could, I looked up and they didn't have a school, but just a quick Google search had articles about it, like the one I referenced, that had a report in 2015. And so trying to calibrate both the ongoing support that's needed, the community outreach that's needed, and the community, frankly, education that's needed around how do school districts who want to do something like this do it in a way that proves successful over time. Because I think, like anything else, there'll be a lot more people interested at 4th grade or 5th grade, where dual language programs are inappropriate to start that late. But we need people like Phyllis Hardy and others to come help us and help the community get a common base of understanding, so when we move forward together. So that's what I hope to do by both having Ms. Hardy, and thank you for agreeing to that, Ms. Hazard, come on February 27th, opening it up to the larger community, and then on March 13th, trying to kick off, my initial thoughts, again, both content, because it won't be just generic, like I've heard all these things, like I'm gathering ideas from every presentation I hear, as well as process to get ongoing community feedback. To Mr. Demling's question that he asked a couple meetings ago, I don't think anything for the next academic year, I just want to say it publicly, I don't think there's any disagreement, but I just want to say it out loud, is feasible. I think the changes that we're talking about are probably a year and a quarter, half, however you want to think about it, away. So I want to be sensitive to the fact that we don't want to wait so long, but I also want to do things in a way that other communities have done them and been successful, which from my conversations with MABE and others, that timeline, we're sitting in an okay place right now to have these conversations in the month of February and March, thinking about a year and a half out, is about where many districts are if they're able to be successful. That was a long-winded response, but hopefully Ms. Ordonez, that filled you in on some of my thoughts at the moment.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yes, Ms. Dorn-Kate.
On a perhaps a related note, do we have a teacher in sabbatical in Finland?
We had.
Oh, we had, okay.
Yeah, at the secondary level.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, I think, look at their school system and how, there are a lot of students, outside of the United States can boast that they speak multiple languages, not just two.
Yes.
In Finland's, educational system is one of them.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for that reminder. I can definitely get in touch with that.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? All right, well, you have given us a lot to think about, and I think I speak for the whole committee when we say it's been a tremendous amount of work, and we appreciate it. And Ms. Hazard, wonderful swan song ever for the committee.
She did such a great job.
I feel like I didn't quite, I'm just looking around and seeing people who helped us. Is Ms. Richardson here?
Yeah, she is.
I want to say thank you so much. And Ms. Torres and Dr. Morris, of course, and Ms. Westmoreland, and we just had a lot of, the families anyway, had a lot of support from a lot of people in the district, so thank you for your help as we did this. It's a group effort. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Gonna pass it back this way?
Well, now I have to decide if I'm going to give it up. I don't know, I kind of like it. There you go.
Okay, so next item on the agenda, communication plan follow-up, preschool focus group. So this is something that we received a two-page piece in our handout, and Dr. Morris can kind of lead us off.
And I want to cut a really clear distinction. This is not related to the preschool subgroup of the enrollment working group. I know awkwardly timed in the agenda for that. This is really about the communication plan, although that being said, it's highly relevant to the present. There's relevant pieces to the presentation you just saw. So one of the things in the communication plan that was presented was about focus groups, and we thought, I've been connecting informally with some faculty and the MBA, interestingly in the MBA program, which is at Eisenberg School of Management at UMass. And there were some students who wanted to do an intercession project with us, and they do a lot of focus groups in terms of their professional work. And so we thought, given all the dialogue that was going on both declining enrollment, it seemed like a worthwhile experience both for them and for us for them to reach out to local preschools in the area, do focus groups, and tell us what they had. So I was not at any of these, just to be really clear. The three students who were listed towards the top, Rashad, Paige, and Chris, they were the ones who did the focus groups. They reached out to all the preschools in the area, about 11. Woodside and Amherst Family Center were quick to respond. There was another one that responded, but the timing didn't work out for that happening. And so they ended up, the end size on this is 15. So they talked to 15 distinct preschool families. Demographically, a little bit different. There's a sub-report that gets into this, but got a little identifying to become a public document. there was some differences between Woodside and the Amherst Family Center, but a reasonable representation of our district, particularly with the Family Center being a more diverse environment. And this isn't our family center, this is the family center that's in the town, that preschool families and younger go to. So I'll just pick on the highlights, especially because of time. I think I'll just summarize and then see if there's questions. But the primary benefits that those families saw about our district were the diversity, and what's not in here is specifically the diversity of students. That there was a value on that in the responses. The wide variety of classes. Families were highly aware that we have a very robust specials program: art, music, physical education, libraries, so on. Language immersion was specifically mentioned by multiple families as a benefit of charter schools in the area, and there was broad interest in that from multiple families. Interestingly, because it's a contrast to the survey we did of charter choice private families last year, test scores came up as being a benefit, or something that those families saw as a strength of our district, which was a bit of a surprise to me. Also, ELL programs. There was a high level of knowledge from what the 3 MBA students reported back, that families who didn't speak English as their first language understood that we provided a very ongoing and thorough ELL program for their students, and they were in the country and wanted their students to acquire English and valued that. And the concerns were about school, and particularly about class size, and there was a lot of interest from families who attend these preschools, don't live in Amherst, and they didn't know quite the school choice process, which I thought was interesting. I'll say the class size is a surprise to us. It was a surprise to me, but having talked to others, our class size is well under 20 students, and it's something I think when we come back to what's the belief system and then what's the reality, it'd be great to be 12 perhaps, but really comparing to ourselves to other elementary school districts in Western Massachusetts, we come out very strong on that matter. There was a lot of thank yous for asking for feedback. That's sort of in here, but more in the qualitative piece. They met with me and Ms. Figueroa, who's leading some of the charge on the communication piece, and they said people were authentically thanking them constantly. Just, thank you for asking, here's what I think about, and this we'll get back to perhaps when we think about the March 1st event and some ongoing engagement with preschool families. So they suggested more focus groups with preschool parents, language that underscores the strengths, just trying to address, like when we talked about the class size piece, that addresses that the concerns may not be consistent with what the experience is of our students and families. And also just, I think the big thing, one of our takeaways, Ms. Figueroa and myself, was that updating the communications material of progress, that as we continue to get information and receive information, that it's actually becomes more of a two-way street where we can share, this is what we learned, this is what we shared, and that's an ongoing iterative process. I think I'll actually leave it there and open up for questions or comments.
Yes, Mr. Denman.
Yeah, this is a tremendous amount of, again, amount of work that we didn't have to pay for.
I'm getting good at that, right?
Right, okay. Yeah, get some more of that.
By necessity.
No, so I guess first thing is, I hope that we have some formal way of, sending a thank you letter to these 3 students who offered to do this work for us. There's a couple of things here that I was pleasantly surprised to hear. That, a lot of the things that I would think of listing myself if I was to start a communications plan from scratch are already echoed from what they're saying, and so that makes me hopeful that the message about what's great about our schools is not it's not completely absent from the public consciousness. It's obviously we've talked a lot about amplifying that and focusing it, but I thought that was great. I love seeing diversity leading the list of things that are great about our district. Right after seeing a presentation about how more than half our students are people of color and all that. The thank you for asking too is also very hopeful to me, because one thing I get a little anxious about as a public school, as we get into this business of communications and outreach, is that we're, as a public school, we're not traditionally in the business of marketing. We're not a for-profit company, and so it's not necessarily in our DNA. And one thing I worry about a little bit, since we are in the business of social public service, is being too pushy. right? And how you manage that kind of advertisement and such. And so hearing from the preschool community that they are happy to have that engagement, it makes me feel very positive about that future. So.
Yeah, I just follow up on that, is that I think that's really interesting, because I remember you saying that the response to the Charter Choice private school survey was also very positive. Thank you for asking. And I think it does speak to the fact that people appreciate being asked for their feedback and their opinions, and that's, I think that it's a positive reflection on our district and how much we care about what the community is thinking and their input. Yeah.
I'm going to build off the things both of you just said. We were talking about the communications plan and just even the need for communications over the last several months. One of the things that I kept thinking about, not just in the role of the schools, but also just in terms of when you're thinking about what relationship do you want to, your entire community, but as a practical matter, your entire community is made up of individuals and families and households and people of different ages, that in every case it looks and feels and authentically is a dialogue, not a monologue. So I think when we're doing communications, we're trying to share strengths we have as a district. If the intentionality of the act is always that you're as interested in hearing the other person's reflections and ideas as much as you are sharing things that they might not be aware of, or even celebrating things they are aware of, or fixing things they are also aware of that things need to be fixed, it's going to always feel a lot different. It's going to feel authentic. It's going to feel grounded. And I think in that circumstance, people always welcome being asked, and particularly when they can see follow-up from it, which is, of course, the key thing then, right, is building this into other things that are being done.
Yes.
I can wait, actually, to address that.
I just wanted to say, I'm thinking about my years back with my children, and I think people talk about, the kindergarten teachers and the first grade teachers, and those are I think, educators and the paraprofessionals that are in those classrooms that make a deep impression on people and really show, what our district is about to the public.
Sorry, Mr. Jones. I apologize. There you are. Yes.
I agree with everything that I think everyone has said so far. Really important work and helpful to hear from this young group of parents who are not necessarily already in the district, but are considering where they will send their children when they're school age, and it's really helpful to hear from them. Kind of what their common conceptions are of our schools. One comment that I just wanted to make was about the school choice thing, because I found that, I appreciate Dr. Morris being surprised about the test scores response. And I actually also was equally surprised, I guess, by the comment about not knowing how to enroll in school choice. And I think, there's very simple remedies to that, making our website easier to navigate, being a little more proactive in how we communicate around our school choice options. But I also think that might be reflective a little bit of our ambivalence about school choice, right? And I think to date we have, and I think rightfully so. Not that I'm criticizing this in any way, but I think we have been extremely cautious in how we approach school choice, both at the Amherst School Committee level and at the regional level, and I think that has been communicated to parents in other communities and other towns, right? And so we've started to develop a little bit of a reputation around, this maybe perhaps what people are starting to perceive as a difficulty in getting, into Amherst schools, unless you happen to live in this town. And I don't think that that's necessarily, again, a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just, sort of stating kind of where we are, and that it will be a communications challenge at some point, moving forward, if we're making a decision about either increasing school choice options for neighboring towns, or if we're going to kind of hold the line and continue the path that we've been going. These are all hard decisions for our district to make. and we have to be very conscious about how we're communicating those decisions to the community, at large. So I think a lot of this, I look forward to continuing the conversations, both about the school choice and about some of the other things that the survey brought up. But I'm glad we did this, and I think it came back with a lot of, while a small sample size, but a lot of valuable information. And I'm really grateful to the students and to, Dr. Morris and to everyone for taking this on and approaching this so thoughtfully.
Yeah, I think just 3 follow-ups. One is that I think Ms. Adonis is right talking about the website, and that is a work in progress. We're hoping, April. There's already some changes for people who have looked, and we're making the navigation easier, but a full reboot is planned for this spring, and both aesthetically but also functionally to improve the website's performance and ability to do outreach, because I don't think it functions very well in that way at the moment. The March 1st event I spoke about when I did superintendent update. So that is, it is more geared to families who have rising kindergartners, but we are opening it up to the K-6, anyone who wants to hear about our schools. Our principals make quick presentations, Mr. Harb, others. But we are putting explicit language that, we can't guarantee school choice seats at that meeting, that if people have questions about school choice process, they're welcome to come. And Ms. Torres, who's actually here tonight, is our elementary registrar, and she'll be able to work with families around that. I think the last thing, which we'll get more details out when it gets closer, is that we are planning an event on April 4th, which is a ways away, but it's particularly as a follow-up, not just to this report, but specifically for preschool families. And at that point, I'll have presented some of my initial thoughts about future direction based on the Enrollment Working Group's reports. They will be a key demographic to be heavily involved in that, because, particularly if we want to explore a dual language program, that's the target audience at this point. It's not, my daughter's 4th grade peers, right? It's family, kids, students who will be in our schools in the next couple of years, and so we are trying to tier out our level of outreach and feedback. Certainly the website performance is one thing. The April 4th event mimicked at the regional level, sorry to flip a little back and forth, like Shutesbury and Leverett, where there's quick presentations from principals, but most of the focus is centered around what questions you have about the schools, what do you want to know about our schools, what do you want our schools to become, right? Much more around that. In April 4th, there will be a presentation component at that point, I think. But again, it's really around gathering more feedback, and even more than that, helping families feel connected to our schools, feeling like they're stakeholders before they register their future kindergartner in our schools, and that they can help set the direction for the district. And I think hopefully that's the intangible change that we're hoping to see. One of the things, and I think you remember me speaking about it when we first got that survey results back all the way last spring, so it's nice to think about this kind of multi-tier process we're in the middle of around engagement and communication. One family member who had his kid, one dad, who told me to call. Remember, there was a couple parents, I think I said that, they listed, please call me, I have more to share. And it happened to be someone I know from the community. And it was a dad who has his children in the private school. And he said, I never thought this, but my kids went to the preschool at this private school, and we got connected to the community. And once we felt connected to the community, we felt connected to the community. And that stays with me in terms of how do we have much more thorough outreach to students before they turn 5 years old, to really feel like they're card-carrying members of our district, and can be active participants before their children arrive. And so that's the goal of some of these steps, is to start breaking down some of the barriers towards that.
Great, thank you very much. And I just want to say that I appreciate the extent, we just heard this dual language presentation, and, this piece, and I feel like something that we've been talking about a lot at both school committee levels is about sort of what does that look like to market our district. And I know you have a lot of balls in the air, and I feel like it's cool to see those balls rolling. Like, it's exciting that they're moving, and it's exciting to see that. So I want to just appreciate that.
And I will write a thank you note on behalf, if it's okay, on behalf of the committee and myself, to the students. I met with them and thanked them, and I'll say that they really enjoyed it. This is not what MBA students typically. It's not a typical MBA project, and I don't know if typical is the right word, but they're not MBA students who are looking to work in schools. Mm-hmm. They're working to work in some not-for-profit, some for-profit business, but they really enjoyed it, and they saw, again, because people were so appreciative, they saw the value in us continuing the work.
That's great.
Yeah. That's great. Cool. Okay, thanks. So Next item is MSBA Statement of Interest discussion, and
Sure. Mr.
Mr.
McPherson,
McPherson,
who's, I think, in the back of the room, will come up and join us. So I'll do some framing as he joins us. So Mr. McPherson are not so new, feels new, but maybe not as new as the last time you saw him, Facilities Director. And so if you remember at the last Amherst School Committee meeting, when this came up as a topic, what we talked about doing is asking Mr. McPherson and his team to do a thorough investigation of the two schools, and they went further and actually investigated Crocker Farm, just because once you start doing it, it's actually good to have a marker of all of our elementary schools in the community. And he'll talk about the process and the results of what he found and what his proposal would be for the committee to consider in terms of which school to prioritize in the MSBA process.
So basically, I drew upon the experience of the mechanics that have been working on the schools for a number of years. We went down through the major subsystems, which are in the left-hand column, the foundations, the wall structures, superstructures, equipment, and so forth. The higher the score, the better the quality of the school or the feature. And we went through and system by system discussed what has been done, what needs to be done, how bad things are, and casting it in that fashion. You notice there's lots of yellow and red on the sheet. Then, having made those assessments based on experience, and that's the next to bottom line, the ARPS Mechanics Estimated Overall Condition Index. That was their estimate overall of the school condition, what needed to be done, how it fit. So then we walked through the buildings, confirming these issues, and I weighted them, importance factor weight. So if the building is a 100 rating when we build it, brand new, we're never going to get there again. We're going to renovate to a 90, 95 condition. So we're really not spending a bunch of money on the foundations unless we have a massive issue in the structure of the building. We're not spending a bunch of money on the walls inside the building. We are spending a bunch of money on the roof, on the building envelope, the exterior enclosure, interior construction, interior finishes in particular. That's where we're going to spend our monies. So that was a guide toward which features we needed to consider most significant in the final rating of the buildings. Randomly, they came out to be exactly the same for all intents and purposes in Fort River and Wildwood, and Crocker Farm's in a little better condition.
Can I
Absolutely.
add two things I want to share. One is that the boiler at Wildwood, you'll see that gets a 90. That's assuming, because town meeting funded new boilers. So I just want to say that hasn't happened yet. That's scheduled for this summer. But we know it's going to happen, so we put it on there. We also made a positive assumption that we have a $30,000 request. We'll have a $30,000 request to do some patching at the Fort River roof, which we spoke about last time. So that 50 is an increase score from what the roof is right now.
Correct.
So I just want to note that those two things are not consistent with the current condition of the schools. They're the condition of schools that we would anticipate when students return next fall. I think the second thing I want to share is two other things, sorry. So I'm going to ask Mr. McPherson to share a little bit his thoughts, given that it's a dead heat, what the recommendation would be. I think also perhaps after that, Mr. McPherson did see all the records that was asked that the teachers, the staff members offered last year of what could be done to improve the current condition of school, and some initial thoughts on that.
Certainly. So Fort River, Wildwood would be the two considerations for which one, or we would choose from, I suppose, for prioritization. Essentially the same overall, no appreciable difference within the crudity of my analysis here. Fort River's issues are more immediate. The roof is leaking. The ceilings are being damaged. Moisture is getting into the building. Wildwood, on the other hand, has a better roof. It's much older, but it's still holding in a much better fashion. So given that we're kind of one or the other, I would lean to Fort River for immediacy if we were going to prioritize. an issue that flows from that, and these are relatively fixed items in the features of the building. Something that's a little more delicate is the air and water balance inside the building. And the users of the building recognize this as discomfort. They're warm, they're cold, they're finding mold and so forth. That's a real issue, and it ties to the ventilation within the building. If we're going to spend money now to not make massive changes within the buildings, that's probably where we should put our money. In the ventilation system. The systems to absolutely correct those features are very, very expensive. We can begin with the control sequence as an example. The computers that control the existing mechanical components, the fans, the boilers, the heaters, and so forth, are old enough that we can't update them either software or hardware. So if we wanted to apply some funding to those, Wildwood and Fort River are both in need of those. If we wanted to apply a little bit of money to Crocker Farms, they're having hot water issues and stack issues. It depends on how you want to handle your budget and the monies that we can apply to the various systems.
Yes, Mr. Knight.
What's a little bit of money? Like, some people think in big figures, and so, they're a little bit of money is like pocket change. Or walking around money is like $500,000 or something.
Yes.
So, I'm just curious what you.
Our estimate for the control systems for each Wildwood and Fort River are $155,000.
Okay.
The boilers, the breaching rather, in Crocker Farm is in the $6,000 range. The hot water heaters, believe it or not, are in the $12,000 range. There's an asbestos ceiling in the kitchen at Wildwood that's in the $40,000 range. So I am sensitive to our size of budget.
Yeah, Mr. Dudley.
Yes, sir.
So a couple specific questions, and then maybe if I could follow up with just a general question. So I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear you say that Crocker is only a little better than Fort River and Wildwood. And actually, when I saw the first coding of this chart, my eyes immediately went to the 3 red bars at Crocker, the plumbing, boiler, and the ventilation.
Yes.
So I think that's relatively new awareness and knowledge in the community about those problems at Crocker. I mean, maybe it's not to the people who actually service the systems, but if you could just maybe talk a little bit more about what the specific issues are there. And then the other detailed question I had was the lowest score on any of these is the electrical at both Fort River and Wildwood, and if you could maybe speak to that, whether that's a safety issue, what the status is.
Okay. So at Crocker Farms, a uniqueness of Crocker Farms is that the building is being used as originally intended for the most part. There was an addition, but for the most part it was a school to be used with rooms divided up as they are, and that was not done badly. The infrastructure was. Apparently they have been fighting those issues since the building was opened. The plumbing has pinholes in the piping. They're fighting leaks. They're fighting valves that are failing. It's again a moderately delicate balance. When you build something, you have to think about going back in and fixing it, and that was not well thought out. On the electrical side, eons ago, 40, 50 years ago, Federal Pacific was producing the electrical panels, and a great many of those panels exist in all federal public buildings. They are fire hazards. In some instances, I would not recognize these as such, but they're very poor quality. They don't hold up. The company has long since been bankrupt. It has been an industry practice to replace these panels very consistently through any renovation. So that's why it's running as low as it is.
Can you just follow up and explain what kind of breakdowns you have as a result of that poor quality?
Of the Federal Pacifics?
Yeah.
So the breakers tend to trip fairly regularly. The electrical components inside the panels that carry the bulk of the electricity are not very well established, so they arc, they trip, they I hesitate to use the word melt, but they're not very high capacity, maybe is a better way to put that.
Other questions? Are you raising your hand? I just can't see. Is she raising her hand?
Anastasia, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I can't tell if anybody else is going. I was just curious about the comments around the electrical, sort of boards, and to Mr. Demling's comments about how low both Fort River and Wildwood rated. But I also noticed that Fort River received a 90 in terms of fire protection, whereas Wildwood, in relation to where it might be with its electrical, is still in the yellow category. Just to follow up on this train of thinking in terms of ensuring that any protections that need to be in place are there. Is that an area where you would recommend that we also consider putting in additional funding for added fire protection in Wildwood?
Potentially. So the distinction made between the various systems is that the Fort River fire detection system was replaced recently. So the components that are distributed through the building are the same, but the software and the hardware that read it, that transmit alarms and so forth, was upgraded. So that's why there's a difference there. Fire protection is in the sprinklers and the construction of the walls. Fire detection is in the electronics that detect the smoke and the heat. I would say that we are in an adequate position for all of those in all of the schools. And if we don't control the moisture coming into the building and the ventilation that controls that, I think we're going to have a greater number of problems than in the fire detection system. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Demling.
And just the general big picture question is, so this is all leading up to submitting to MSBA, and as you probably know, it's a very competitive process. There was an article I read, the MSBA director from last fall, where they say they get more than 80 applications and they turn away more than 3/4. So
Yes.
it's really about submitting a school and making it look as needy as possible. So in terms of how we present the schools, if technically it's more or less the same, is Fort River the choice because of its more immediate issues? You can
Yes.
make more of a evocative, compelling case about leaks and other infrastructure issues impacting the
Exactly.
classroom.
Exactly.
Questions? Comments? Yeah.
Well, so we'll segue into the launch of the MSBA letter or process, or
Yes.
is there- yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that's a recommendation Mr. McPherson made. I've been very clear, I don't have the technical acumen to add much to Mr. McPherson's. I do want to appreciate the thoroughness of not just you, but your team. I know you were
Thank you.
seen in many buildings, just walking around, people are like, everything okay? Because there's like 5 people from maintenance just crawling around. So I do appreciate that. I think what we would come back to at the next Amherst School Committee meeting would be potentially a vote to support the application, which then would then go to the select board. Because in the MSBA process, both the local school committee and select board need to endorse a recommendation. And Mr. McPherson would do some work writing up a potential statement of interest for your consideration for
Exactly.
both schools, but sounds like with a prioritization for Fort River.
And I would agree, emphasis.
Right.
Yep.
How does that impact the work of the Fort River Building Committee?
Go
Do you want me to start just with
If
the
you like.
timeline piece?
If
and
you
then
like,
jump
sure.
in? So, statement of interests are filed by April, a date in early April, and then generally people find out around the new year. So, in the short term, there's not necessarily specific implications based on the timeline that the Fort River Building Committee has a lot of work to do between now and essentially a year from now, when that process, which generally takes 5 years, would, in the best of luck, kick off.
Right.
So I didn't mean to.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So I would say that they are
very closely related in costs, because the feasibility study will develop a level of fix existing, replace part of existing, replace all existing, do something completely unusual. The process for going through the other program will be, we're in bad shape, we need funding to support us, but it's based on this specific facility as it exists at this time. It's not the exploration of what we might do with it. So I think there will be some similarities, but there will be a significant difference in time and a significant difference in focus. Does that make sense?
I was just going to say, I think also, and this obviously echoes a lot of the work that was done last spring on this topic, is that a number of, and summer and fall, is a number of the deliverables that are identified for completion by that group, I think would be useful in further informing, not the selection process or the statement of interest necessarily, but can inform, if we were lucky enough, I mean, I guess under best case scenario, we'd wake
Yes.
up next January and find that we were selected and we could move forward, and then we would already have a body of analysis that would help to refine our understanding of the site and the building, which would be extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that the last school building committee, there was a school building committee member who I think has authored or is planning to author a specific email to the MSBA, trying to get more information about the interplay between those potential two variables. And I know I believe it's going to be on the agenda for the next school building committee meeting, which is scheduled for February 15th. So I think by the time we all get back together and are talking about this again, we'll have a bit more information of where the building committee is on this, because it's an active part of the conversation. They're highly aware of the interplays, and thanks to Mr. Makajima for letting them know this discussion was happening tonight.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I know town meeting allocated some money towards a feasibility study for the current building committee, and I know that that can't replace, if we were to select it to enter again, their feasibility study. So that would be, a question, like, have we spent down the money, is another question. Also, the MSBA also has different programs, like the boiler program or a green repair program or something like that. So I just wanted to see if there are other programs that we could apply for funding for Wildwood, for example, if Fort River was going through another.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think my short answer, I'll get a little more detailed, is that I think at some point it makes sense, perhaps as this MSBA statement of interest process occurs, for there to be, and we did this before, like some level of joint meeting so that there could be some discussion between the school committee and the school building committee. I do think a lot of the questions you cited are the ones that I heard at the last school building committee meeting. I think they'll end up in an email to the MSBA, so I think we will have more information in coming weeks. In terms of the other repair programs, those are generally for programs where there's not the schools aren't deemed to have needs beyond the specific roof or boiler or windows. Those are the three variables that are typically in them. My conversations last year with the MSBA is they're highly aware that 2 of our 3 schools have multiple issues that go beyond those variables, and if you do enter for that process, it removes you from the core process for a length of time. So I think that's the delicate balance of where we are and what to fund, and I think why I just want to put a finer point on what Mr. McPherson said about the ventilation. A lot of the suggestions that came from faculty had to do with the ventilation.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't necessarily name, actually I would say none of them perhaps named exactly what Mr. McPherson is doing as a suggestion, but the source or the issue that the suggestions from staff were trying to solve, the problem they were trying to solve, many of them, the largest theme was around ventilation.
Yes.
They wouldn't necessarily think of an electronic control system to manage heat and moisture and things like that, but that was the most common theme that faculty had.
Mm-hmm. And am I correct if you sign up for the boiler repair program, something like that, you do have to sign off that you don't have other concerns. So on some level, you have to, state that there aren't other problems, which would be kind of difficult to do in the circumstances. Okay, any
We
other?
will emphasize
Oh,
as
sorry,
best
yes,
we
one
can.
more? Oh, and one more over here, 2 more, or 3 more, I don't know. Go ahead.
Also, Dr. Morris, you started talking about some of the feedback from staff about the buildings aren't being replaced, what are some short-term things? Is that something you want to go into more detail now or later? Or?
I mean, I think the theming is more important. I mean, we were talking to a faculty of educators who do a wonderful job, like what I tried to do is focus on education. So, there were conversations about air purifiers, things like that,
Right.
in our current setup, frankly, there's not a lot of science to back up that they're going to actively contribute to resolving ventilation issues.
But we're warm, we're cold, we have allergies. We would like to see more air purification. We'd like to see more fresh air. All of that leads to ventilation.
Exactly.
That is the same system in my world.
Yep. So that was the primary themes that we heard.
Yes, Ms. O'Donoghue.
Yeah, sorry, this is starting to feel like a Sophie's Choice again, which is just very depressing. So I'm thinking about just the question about, prioritizing one of these buildings over the other, and I appreciate thinking going into the fact that this chart represents kind of where we're going to be in the fall of next year. But I still, it still seems like both buildings are in equally bad shape, right? I mean, this very objective analysis in both buildings came up with the two of them, as I think somebody described, as a dead heat. And so I'm having some difficulty accepting that we would prioritize Fort River at this point in time. And I guess, and I understand that we have to do that for the applications, but I'm also, sort of wondering kind of what plan B is, right? And so if we are going to be in this mode where we're putting in these applications, we're prioritizing one over the other, but both are still, we're putting in applications for both buildings simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so at what point do we see one sort of pull ahead of the other? Like, do we expect that by next year Wildwood would be in slightly better shape than where it is right now, and therefore we can just mostly concentrate on Fort River? This is some of my anxiety, I guess, that you're hearing right now.
Sure. So, as I mentioned jokingly in my first meeting, but not jokingly, we have a financial issue, and until we apply significant tens of millions of dollars, we're not going to make substantive strides in correcting our overall problems. That is just a fact of life. So until we expend substantive funding to one building or another, or maybe we bring them along simultaneously, neither is going to pull ahead of the other, barring some unusual or catastrophic event.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I just want to echo Ms. Ordonez's sentiment, which is, the cold, hard calculating part of me says, this is an MSBA process. They require us to prioritize one as a designation. Therefore, we have to do it. Therefore, which one can we make appear the most needy in a submission process? Let's analyze it, bring out the data, and then. So that to me is no problem. But it's extremely depressing and frustrating that we know we have a clear and urgent need to address two buildings with a litany of issues, and we can only, if we go MSBA, the best case scenario, we're hitting one building before the other. And so then, again, it's a Sophie's Choice. I don't know if that's the right metaphor. It's some sort of paradox of you want to address something to make quality of life better for the staff that are telling us this repeatedly of, like the ventilation system. And yet, what happens, I'm just saying off the top of my head, if we improve the ventilation system in Wildwood, now all of a sudden that building condition appears better for the next year's statement of interest. And do we want to do that? You put a Band-Aid on the open wound, now that wound is not so open in the submission process. So I don't really say that in terms of contributing productively to the conversation, but it is certainly something that is always on my mind, and I'm just sort of putting off to the side, and, you know, we go through what we go through because we don't have the funding to address this right now.
So just to make sure we're in the same place, because we prioritize one is not going to make the picture for the other one rosy. So both will be presented as in poor condition.
Yeah, I mean, the MSBA route is one route to replace or fix or repair or renovate our schools. I think the town also has another avenue to tap into.
I suppose, so in one, my assumption is, regardless of what both of my colleagues have just expressed, my assumption is we're going to submit a statement of interest to the MSBA, and we're going to avail ourselves of the program, and that we see significant benefits in doing so. And given that, if we're forced to pick one school over the other, then I suggest let's just do it. Because it's a function of getting the money, it's a function of participating in the program, and I think our public, which has just spent an inordinate amount of time debating the MSBA process and school building construction for the last 2 years, should be sophisticated enough to understand, particularly if the statements of interest are clear that if we, for example, pick Fort River, to call Fort River, in this case, the priority, and identifying elements that make that case, but also in the context of a statement of interest for Wildwood that's also clear about its substantial deficiencies. I think the town's going to get the idea that no one's saying that Wildwood is great and is fine because we had to pick one of them rather than the other. I don't have any basis, it's just echoing something the superintendent said earlier, I don't have any basis to say it should be one over the other. So if your best judgment is that Fort River is marginally worse, or you can make a marginally stronger case that it's worse, then great. I'm happy to proceed. But I think I'm just saying that I really respect a lot what Mr. Demling and Mr. Donahue said, and I appreciate it, and I certainly agree that they both should be replaced and they both have needs. I think we should embrace the opportunity to apply, and then similarly and simultaneously embrace the opportunity to engage the community in a way that helps people understand this process, why we did what we did, and then where we can make marginal improvements. But I guess don't do something really perverse that Mr. Demling was suggesting, of making something too good to not qualify in future years. While also, no, I'm not making fun of you, and I'm not criticizing you.
No, I know.
I'm just saying that that where there are ways in which we can ameliorate some of the concerns that we have. I guess this is going to sound like a funny thing to say, Mr. McPherson. I'm going to trust that given the resources at hand, which I think is what you were saying earlier, you can't possibly make Wildwood, for example, so great that it would no longer qualify in the future to the MSBA.
That is absolutely correct.
That seems like damning you with faint praise. It's not quite Robinson Crusoe, right? But if that's the case, then again, this is a weird conversation to have. Then if that's the case, then I would embrace the idea that we try to make Wildwood as good a place as we can, while keeping our eye on the ball of fixing both schools as soon as we can.
Yes.
So is it okay if I take a little bit of a step back? And not to belabor dialogue, but so February 15th is the date where the schools are up at joint capital planning. So we'll be talking about some of these items, at that meeting for the joint capital planning committee of the town. We have an active school building committee that's formed, that's looking at, and it's looking just at the feasibility, right? Not getting towards schematics, but that's actively going. We're applying for this grant, with your vote and the select board's vote, that we hope to receive. We have, as Mr. Demling updated us, a conversation happening with Pelham. And I'm not trying to foreshadow anything. I'm just saying there's a lot of stuff happening, right? We had a conversation at the regional level that who knows where that'll land and what space will be available, somewhere down the road. So I do think there's a lot of balls in the air. And I think my advice, and it's not to disagree with anything any of the committee members heard, is to proceed with the application, proceed with the building committee, which my accounting as a non-voting member is doing really good work and earnest work of volunteers from the community. We're pursuing multiple avenues that are, sort of unrelated, but I do think we'll know more 11 months from now than we know now, both from the results of the feasibility study, results of this application, where the regionalization process is potentially headed or not headed. And I think it's hard because I'll be candid to say, right, it's no surprise to anyone that I feel really strongly about the condition of our buildings and the impact on our students, right? You've all heard me speak more than you'd probably like over the last 3 years talking about that. And I think we're taking multiple steps at the pace that we can to try to address those needs. And I think this report's incredibly helpful in identifying some of the challenges. I think JCPC hearing about some of the challenges and some of the potential solutions is a really healthy thing. And I think we have to proceed with all those avenues as quickly as we can. And I think the hard thing for me, and I don't want to intuit for anyone else, but the hard thing for me is as quickly as we can. There's a gap between as quickly as we can and as quickly as we want. When you're talking about huge 7-digit, 8-digit, as you said, tens of millions of dollars, capital projects, right, they have a pace that's inconsistent with what we would want to do and what we'd want to have for our students. And I think that's the discomfort that I feel. And it's the discomfort I feel like my job is to live with and take the affirmative steps that we can to try to address those needs within the systems that we have. And so I feel like we are taking those steps affirmatively. And I also want to acknowledge that there are kids in schools right now that and parents, guardians of students who hearing me say something like we're taking all the affirmative steps is insufficient. I want to both acknowledge that's very real, and that's not a critique of the families. They're 100% right, and I think it is, my read of it is it is where we are. Sorry, that was long-winded.
That's okay, and I think that, whatever a decision that is made by this body and the people here regarding a priority does not reflect a lack of sort of understanding and appreciation and acknowledgement of what students and teachers are the struggles that are real in these buildings and that in both buildings, but in the sort of the cold hard reality is a decision does need to be made. So thank you.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a comment on the graph. I think that it would be nice to have like a key for the colors.
Oh,
like
certainly.
what would you describe yellow to be? Or red or
Sure.
green.
Sure.
Also in the feature column,
Sure.
you have it weighted.
Yes.
And so there's only 0.04, 0.05, and 1. And so
Right.
I would like maybe if it's weighted heavily, put it on top or something, so that way we can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's that those are. I think that might be helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
But thank you so much. It
Certainly.
looks pretty objective and rational. Thank you.
So one thing I would add, and I am the bearer of the cold hard truth, not only are we not moving as fast as we desire, we're not moving as fast as we need to. We're not going to be able to hold this together for a decade at the funding level we're at. An unfortunate truth.
It's like a good future conversation.
Yes.
Do we have we must, right, a deferred maintenance sort of column or item, like in terms of how much money, overall we need to.
So, we did, certainly.
Yeah, so I think there's two things happening. We do, as I understood it, I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. One is about deferred maintenance and how much we spend on maintenance, and the second, which I think Mr. McPherson was talking about, is capital items that would go to the town that aren't in our operating budget but are capital. And I want to just check my understanding of your question to make sure.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
the conditions as reflected are indicative of the lack of capital investment maintenance over the years. So the deferred maintenance is built in to those scores. You could catch up with enough operating budget, but I think it's impractical So I think you're looking at a substantive capital investment to bring the systems up so that you can maintain them under a reasonable operating budget.
Anastasia or Mr. Ordonez, anything else? No? Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Pearson.
Okay. Okay, next item is FY18 second quarter budget update.
There's nothing in our packets.
Yep, he has the handouts, I think, with him. Mr. Mangano does. I'll actually be back in a minute. So I'll pass one.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I want to thank Jen for sticking it out for the Q1 budget
Thank
report.
you.
Superintendent left. So this is the quarter one budget report. I'll try to speak slowly because I don't know if Anastasia has a copy of this, so I'll try to go through it so she can follow along.
Thank you.
The fiscal outlook for FY18 has worsened since the first quarter report as a result of a second mid-year premium increase for health insurance. That's sort of the theme for this report, so that's the lead. In payroll accounts, we are projected $106,400 over budget due to the following: increased ELL staffing at the district level and at Wildwood, which cost $53,600. Increase in general education and special education paraeducator support, which cost $47,600. Additional classroom teacher at Fort River, which cost $51,600. And that's been offset by administrative reductions and staff turnover, which has saved $46,400. In contracts, there is $70,800 unencumbered, which will be used for ELL or English language learner tutors, translations, special education, extended day and year staff, and van monitors. And substitute costs are currently projected to finish on track. In expense accounts, in response to the second health insurance premium increase, all expense account spending has been restricted to essential purchases only. This measure will likely stay in effect for the entire year to ensure adequate funds are available to cover the increase in health insurance spending. Utilities are tracking under budget due to fewer fuel purchases than initially planned. The district was able to fill up the tanks in June last year, which has a positive effect on this year's spending. This area of the budget will change, though, based on the severity of the remaining winter season. Food services is showing significant signs of improvement so far this year. Each month, participation has increased, and the financial outlook is positive at this time. The chart below compares each school year over year through December. So the solid line is this year, the dotted line is last year. So the most improvement can be seen at Wildwood, almost 5 percentage points as of December. You can also see across the board in December all the schools are higher than they were a year ago at this time. Since the Q1 report, a second mid-year increase to health insurance was approved by the town manager. This increase was effective for February. The overall impact is premium rates are now 21 to 29% higher than they were originally budgeted to be. The impact, health insurance is projected to close $430,000 over budget as a result of both mid-year premium increases, so that's sort of the combined effect of that. The committee already approved $152,000 in transfers to health insurance from other areas of the budget. You may recall we did a 10% across-the-board supply reduction along with some other accounts. The goal is to cover the remaining $278,000 from savings in liability insurances and other benefit accounts, utilities, food services, and unexpended supply accounts. In addition, the committee approved drawing up to $75,000 more from the school choice fund. We don't want to use that, so the plan is to avoid using that, but that's been approved. And at this point, the spending plan for FY18 will be monitored closely as we head into the third quarter, and further budget adjustments may be necessary as the spending picture develops further.
Okay.
Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Mangano? Yes, Mr.
It's an
Duncan.
interesting jump in the Wildwood food participation rate.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Harb, have any comment on that?
Well, he's not here, but I can tell you what he might say. So we have all new staff there. I think the staff we have we're really excited about. There's been a lot of changes to menus across the board, so I think the menus are a little bit more exciting. Project Bread has been in the district, and I think they've been to Wildwood recently. And it was either last week or the week before, there was a really popular menu item that the kids really loved, and so I know that that's helped boost participation. So
You know
we
what
might
it
even see
was?
that. I don't, but I will get that to you because it was really popular, and kids were talking about it the next day. So
Interesting.
And I want to note that today I was having a conversation that there are more vegetarian options. People were really appreciating that. And
Yeah.
tofu was enjoyed.
and they're marked on the menu, so you know.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's great. Yeah.
I was just rah-rahing vegetarians.
Oh, yeah. Other questions?
I did notice you managed to pick out the one positive in this
Yeah.
report, so I appreciate that.
Well, you know.
Along with utilities, sorry.
So
mean,
sorry.
No.
Are these the staffing changes, is that result of needs that were not known and anticipated until midway through the year?
Yep. I mean, in particular, the paraeducator support, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we usually have a staffing contingency, because some of the needs we don't know until the
Right.
year starts. Well, the same thing with the additional classroom at Fort River, that was based on enrollments that
I
weren't
see.
originally planned.
Okay.
Are there any likely surprises in Q3 in term based on past historic experience?
Not so much here. The major one to watch will be health insurance, if anything else has to be done with it. We're sort of in a weird spot with health insurance because we don't know if there could potentially be additional cost this fiscal year, or if it'll hit over July and August, which will be next fiscal year. So other than health insurance, there's nothing major that I can foresee.
But it may sound crazy. That's also kind of good news, right?
Mhm.
Because I mean, if there's one thing that we know has been going negative in terms of our budget, at least focusing on that one thing and trying to adjust is better than if you were to say, oh, and we have 4 different quotes coming in that would adjust second half of the year spending, or there's mid-year adjustments in staffing that, you know, if it goes, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
if there were 3 other moving parts, then you'd be a lot more nervous than if
Yeah.
you're just waiting for that one thing
Yeah.
to hit.
An example, I mean, in the region, sometimes that happens because tuitions are part of the region budget. There's not as much to do with tuitions because the town pays that cost directly and we reimburse them. So that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we feel pretty comfortable with is our preschool population with special needs start school when they turn 3. It's not like they, as opposed to the rest of the, I mean, we do get new students from different places all the time, but it's particularly the program model by law is students turn 3, they can join our preschool, and we have a pretty good read at this point of the year, and the students coming for the rest of the year by our ongoing communication with REACH, which is our early intervention provider in the town of Amherst. So we have good lists, we know who's coming, we have the staffing that we need, and that's some of the adjustments sometimes we make is early in the year, it's hard to predict, oh, that student who's coming in April, because the kid's 2, right? You don't exactly know what the kids' needs are going to be.
Right.
We're a little, as we get further into the year, and I know I've been in touch, as has Mr. Mangano, with the special education department who's connected to that. We know the kids who are coming, we have a reasonable assumption of costs and staffing to meet their needs. It's just hard to forecast in September.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Just a vocabulary question.
Sure.
Unencumbered or unencumbered? What
Yeah, so something's considered encumbered when there's a purchase order that's been approved and executed, or if it's like payroll and we project it, so there's a contract in place for it. So that's mostly what's in that encumbered column. So if it's unencumbered, it means it's in a budget line, but there's nothing sort of committed against it at this point. It's
Earmarked?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of discretionary spending for each of these different areas that's normally sort of spent evenly throughout the year or in sort of waves throughout the year, but it's not currently committed.
Okay, great.
Just, I don't know.
Anastasia or Ms. Ordonez, sorry. No, all set? Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Mangano.
Yeah, like frozen there for a second.
She looked a little frozen.
I know. No, she's not frozen.
Okay. All right, and we have an FY19 fees vote.
So there are 2 fee increase requests for Amherst. One is the before school program and one is in preschool. Both requests have been made after consulting with the coordinators of those programs. And both are really intended just to sort of keep revenues at the same pace as expenses are growing, or trying to keep them at the same pace as expenses are growing. The before school program has a few paraeducators that are paid to run that program, and the preschool has a teacher. Well, this portion, the revolving fund portion of the preschool program, pays for a teacher and a para that work in the program.
Okay, so at this point, what are you looking for from us?
Yeah, so this would be a vote, or if you need more information, I think we talked a little bit about the preschool revolving fund at the budget hearing, actually, or at the initial budget presentation. But if there's any questions on the programs or data that you need in order to make the vote.
Yes.
For each, like ballpark, each like 1% increase in full fees for athletic participation, what does that net you in terms of revenue?
Athletics?
Yeah.
Okay. Probably somewhere.
Well, I can back up a little, maybe a slightly easier question, which is, we're obviously in a very tight budget year, and we're cutting things that we don't want to cut. And so when I think about what are all the knobs that we can turn on the budget, I look at fees, and when I look at fees with that mindset, I don't want to increase reduced fees if I can, it'll help. And so I'm saying, okay, for those that can afford the full fee, is it worth considering more substantial increases to the full fee? And I just picked out athletics as the one that had full and reduced. But if it's not that big of an impact, then.
Yeah.
So I'm can I use a different example? Is that okay? So let's talk, if we could use preschool, I think that'd be a good one to use. So the preschool, the suggestion, the recommendation is to go up 25 cents from $5.25 to $5.50. I think one of the concerns that I heard expressed at some points is that that's considerably lower than private preschool rates in the community. We have an integrated preschool. I think my personal opinion is the typical students get a wonderful experience, but the model sort of hinges on having typical students. It's a public preschool. We want to get as many students in, and so it's not a private preschool. It offers a different experience. I think incredibly valuable. Teachers with master's degrees, right? I could sing the praises, but I think to charge the same cost as a private preschool, we worry that we wouldn't get the right mix of students that's needed for that integrated model to work. So I think we're always trying to think of that cost balance. I know Mr. Donez and Mr. Wamedy Cage were at a conference last year, actually, with lots of conversations on fees, as I recall, and I think it's one of the things that I remember hearing, and certainly either of you can comment, is fees are tricky business. That it's not just ability to pay, but it's also what it means to be a public institution that charges fees and what it does to people's feelings about the district. So I think there's a financial element, and I'm not suggesting anyone disagrees with that. But it's also about how are we providing service, and we're not trying to make money off our preschool, right, or our before school or after school programs. It's trying to be as self-sufficient as it can be given some constraints. So my personal opinion is I think we are increasing fees. 5-6% is a pretty reasonable amount. It's not 0%, but I think it is something to contribute to the revolving funds that both of these, particularly the before school program and preschool, help offset costs. It's a service for the community, is the way we try to view it.
So if people feel comfortable, I will take a motion. If people do not feel comfortable and need more time, yeah.
I move to approve the proposed changes for the FY 2019 fee schedule for the Amherst schools.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Yes.
So I appreciate the comment about preschool. I was more asking about other fees that have like a reduced scale, like food services and athletics. So I might not be understanding this correctly, that those go into revolving accounts that then support those specific things. It doesn't just go in a big bucket of money.
Right.
But we do, part of the budget does go to subsidize athletics. Right? It's not a fully funded, self-funding thing. And so I don't know whether you or Dr. Morse could comment on whether you had looked at what would the impact be of also increasing athletic full fees and also increasing food service full fees. Again, I'm very sensitive to what you just said about this isn't just increase the fee, we get more money, yay, simple variable solution. It's we don't want to be in the business of having to charge fees. On the other hand, we're looking at very substantial cuts in a very difficult budget year. And so I just want to make sure that before we vote a full slate of fees, that we've fully considered and then said, okay, no, we don't want to go above certain levels.
Can I ask a point of order?
Yeah, that's what I was coming.
Go ahead.
Just that athletics are at the regional level, so is that something that we maybe want to talk about?
Oh, okay.
That's why I gave you
My
a
mistake.
response earlier, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mistake.
No, that's, is that what your point of order was? Yeah.
And it's
It's
more
easy
beca-
to like to
but it's also
forget
it's
where
also
we are,
because it's
but
not. I'm not being a stickler about discussing it in like in a functional way, like it's not a reasonable question. It's more a matter of literally. I think we have a quorum of the regional district here, so
Right.
we're getting ourselves in trouble if we
Right,
talk
right.
about it.
Right.
No, that's
Okay.
a good point.
I'm just doing how many
Oh,
cases.
yeah.
Yeah, so to clarify, essentially the fee increase only impacts the preschool and the before school program.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where we are.
And looking at what the increases are, 25 cents, 10 cents, and 5 cents, I think is pretty fair. And aside from that, I wonder if is the town has community development block grant money that they allocate to different programs and that the town provides. I wonder if it's a possibility to tap into some of that funding for this purpose of offsetting some of the costs to the parents. But I'm ready to approve these fees, but just trying to explore ways of getting more money into our school district.
Any other comments? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to respond directly, I mean, I think the before school program, in terms of appropriated budget support.
It's supposed to have zero.
Right.
So it's supposed to be fully self-sustaining.
Yeah.
I see.
And in terms of lunch, I mean, I think it's our participation rates are up. I'm not a MBA student like the report that we got earlier, but I just worry about if we raise the price too much, at what point does it become, well, that's actually really expensive for lunch. I can do something else differently. I mean, I think it is a tricky balance.
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
try to
lunch
do.
we're pretty close to everyone around, maybe a smidge higher, but we're really driven by the floor when it comes to lunch. There's a floor that the state has a minimum price that they've set, and we'll probably actually hit it not next year, but the year after. We may have to consider another 25-cent increase to lunch, but we're very comparable for lunch and to our neighbors.
Okay. Okay, so without further discussion, I'll take a roll call vote, starting at this end.
Demling, aye.
Dominic H.I.
Hazard, aye.
Nakajima, aye.
Ordona's aye.
Great, thank you. It's
Thank you.
unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Mangano. All right, so next item, superintendent's goals vote. All right, so these are goals that we have seen at the regional level as well and had the opportunity to discuss. Is that, would you like to
There's
speak to
some.
of the
Yeah, I mean,
differences?
these are the goals. I presented them last time at the Amherst School Committee meeting. So a couple of the changes. One is I put more explicitly how each goal connects. Some were a little easier to identify than others. How each connects to last year's goals, which I thought was a great suggestion, just to show that. The second piece that you'll see differently is that each one has a standard and indicator connected to it, which will be important as we go later in the evaluation process. I mean, I think it's good practice in general, but it also becomes much more important later on in the evaluation process. And there was also some wording changes based on the feedback I received, particularly goal 3 around the social justice focused professional development, as well as just some clarified language about the enrollment working group, the subgroups, and sort of what we talked about tonight in terms of a path forward and the presentations. The ideas aren't wildly different from what you saw at the last meeting, but some of the formatting and language did see some shifts.
Great, thank you. And I do really appreciate how you've linked it to the standards. That's really helpful as we go forward in this process. Yeah.
I really appreciated the work and thoughtfulness you put into it. When I was reading through them earlier, my initial thought was, God, Mike Morris gets better all the time, because I'm so appreciative of the fact that you linked backward to last year and sort of a progressive development of the goals from one year to the other. Because when we think of strategic planning and implementation and future superintendent goals, we'd want to keep doing that year by year. And so now I'm going to say it differently. What's really cool is your active listening skills and your willingness to listen to that suggestion. And whoever made it, my hat's off to them. This person's on the screen there?
Yeah, she can't see us, but that's the person
It kind of figures. It's funny, when you just said that, I thought it was, oh my God, that was Anastasia. She's so smart. And you're a good listener.
Thank you.
Other comments? You can also take a motion. Yep.
I move to approve the superintendent's goals as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote. We'll start at that end this time.
That's you, Ms. Ordonez.
That's you, Ms. Ordonez. You can start with your roll call vote.
Okay, thank you. Ordonez, aye.
Nakajima, aye.
Hazard, aye.
Dwamini Cage, aye.
Demling, aye.
Great. Thank you so much. Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
And did we have any gifts? I think we did.
Sadly,
No.
I believe we do. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So that brings us to school committee planning. So we have the report on school visits by the superintendent. This is on the 27th of February, I believe.
Yeah, it is the 27th of February. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I was gonna.
You're gonna jump in? Okay.
Yeah, but no, please continue.
Okay,
I didn't
so
mean to interrupt
the
you.
budget hearing, the school choice vote. I also have, we now have MABE presentation with a public comment or public question and comment period. SO, it looks like we're going to be moving towards the SOI vote at our next meeting. Is that correct? Okay, and that's what I have so far. Is there yet?
Yeah, I was going to make just a couple suggestions. One, just in terms of right-sizing the agendas.
Yep.
I think, Ms. Hardy from MABE can come at 6 o'clock, so I'd like to start. I mean, certainly there could be public comment and things like that, but I think she would be at the beginning of the meeting, if that would be agreeable to the group, because she doesn't live here, and I think would like to get home at a reasonable hour. I think it should be a school choice hearing and not a vote, unless we had one last time, but I don't. Actually, no, we did have one in Amherst.
We had a
I
public
apologize.
hearing.
We did, so that is
It can be a
correct.
school
That's
choice
my
vote,
mistake.
okay.
I'm wondering, the superintendent report on school visits, just if that's a chock-full agenda, I'd like to integrate it into the path forward in the enrollment working group, because I think there's logical connections which I can reference in that presentation rather than its own item. It's been a while, for all good reasons, it didn't get on agendas, but I do think there's very direct implications in terms of taking all that feedback of the enrollment work group, as well as this preschool focus group, and it's another data source I'd like to use. So if it's okay to strip it from the agenda, and we'll talk about it on the 13th of March,
Sure.
if that's okay. Just because I think between the budget hearing, the SOI vote, school choice vote, and MABE, especially if we're engaging the community by allowing for community dialogue, my personal opinion is that's a
That's
meeting.
enough. That's sufficient.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts on future agenda items?
So on the MABE presentation, I don't know what level of communication/advertising we should do for that, and how to frame it.
That's a
It's
good
not
question.
like, hey, we've chosen to do dual language, come hear about it. But it is, we're seriously discussing it. We want your feedback and your input. So I don't know how to do that.
Right, that's a very important point. Yeah, Dr. Morse, do you have a thought?
Yeah, so I was planning on Friday, not that everyone always reads every word of the superintendent newsletter, but I was planning on just making a Google file. Ms. Westmoreland and I spoke about this morning, a Google file of all the presentations that have happened so far, which we did earlier. We linked to some in that letter, but also being very explicit that one of the last presentation today, and I know Ms. Ordonez and Ms. Hazard write letters to the community as well, and maybe it could be in both places. Just that, Phyllis Hardy's coming. There is not just opportunity to listen, but actually, a dedicated time for community questions and feedback. Try to cut that balance of saying she's not proposing that we do a dual language in Amherst, but she is an expert in dual language programs and has a lot to offer. So I think there's going to be some nuance, because what I don't want to do is suggest something that is not accurate, right? That people could read that and say, oh my God, here's this person and she's going to make a recommendation to the school committee, and that's not the goal of the session.
Right.
But I think I can write nuanced language enough with Ms. Moreland's help to share it that way. Certainly, if there are other vehicles, it's right after break, which is good or bad timing, depending what you think. And then Ms. Ordonez has her hand up.
Yes.
So I was wondering if, as the committee knows, we had approached the Gazette several months ago, last fall, and they had agreed to let us do these fairly regular columns, which we actually haven't done since September because we haven't really had any major updates that we wanted to bring the community up to speed on. This feels like maybe that might be the opportunity that we could talk about all the different working groups and those presentations, as the superintendent just mentioned. And because it goes to the community at large through the Gazette, it has a wider saturation point. And we could mention the MSBA group, we could mention the dual language, but that would be part of, the context of all of these different groups that have put together an incredible amount of research on all of these different topics to get us a little further ahead in our overall discussion on, both educational program and other questions.
And just adding to that, I think we could also, not that I want to put more in the letter, but also that I'd be sharing some level of next steps at the 13th of March, right? So that people see it's not the only opportunity,
right.
that it's actually part of a continuum of presentations, events, and activities. So that, not that I do want to discourage people from going the 27th, but that's not the only time that people will be able to engage with some of the content.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's a good idea. I think both are good ideas. I guess all three, right? Because you were also suggesting doing it in your weekly newsletter. And in particular, because I think if you keep that context of connecting it to the work of the enrollment working group, the summary of the progress to date, the fact that this is in a period in which next steps are being discussed, then I really think it takes down the temperature level or the risk that anyone's going to view Ms. Hardy's presentation as being decisive in some way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's in the spirit of the enterprise that there's lots of really good information. And in fact, I would go to something that Ms. Ordonez either just said or is implicit in what she's saying, which is not everyone pays attention to these meetings. I mean, we've had great turnout, but not everyone pays attention to these meetings. And the reality is the work of the working groups aren't as valuable as they need to be until a broader segment of the community has a chance to look at them and think about them as well. And so having the 27th and the 13th as being two additional touch points where the community can really immerse themselves more in the learning prior to decisions being made is exactly the tenor of what we're trying to do, I think, in terms of engaging the public and bringing them in.
Right. So just to summarize, I think this is good. And from what I'm hearing, we would have the superintendent's update, the chair, vice chair update could also include it. Ms. Ordonez and I will approach Mr. Moulton about the possibility of doing a piece. I'm thinking the week after next. Is that the week of break? Where are we?
Yep.
That is the week of break.
That's true.
Yeah.
But seeing if we get an update in the bulletin, that seems like the right time to do it. And I'm also thinking if we could get it in the PGO updates, that would be a good place to put it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what would be going in PGO updates.
Oh, just that well, it's
I
just
mean, is
another place to say the school committee will be having, and people are, I mean, it's sort of I'm just thinking about, when you have a situation where you're inviting the public to come and,
right.
What do people actually read?
Yeah. So, I mean, Mike, I didn't say it come out the way I intended it to. I mean, would you like for me to reach out to the PGO saying, if you didn't catch this in the newsletter, it's something that we're trying to actively inform the community about. I mean,
does that feel comfortable to
absolutely.
you?
I just want to make sure that we're on the same page of
that's exactly
what
what
I'm
I was
communicating.
implying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good, great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Not for the next couple meetings, but I'm inspired by the graph on food services, and I hope you have one for the regional as well. And by the way, I hope it looks as cool. But that's more of a hope. That's a wish. You can't make it look as cool unless it is the facts make it so. But I think in the same way that I'd propose it at the region, I think it'd be awesome if we could have a presentation while you're here or while you're not here. Actually, I'm really sad to say. Think that one through, because I would love to
we'll schedule an extra meeting.
We may need to. No, because I would really love to have a full a full presentation on how it's gone this year.
Right.
I think it would really be valuable.
I thought you
Yeah,
were going to say samples.
that's what I was thinking.
Well, I want to know what the tofu dish is.
Yeah?
I'd love to
Stir
know
fry.
what the tofu
First
dish
smoothie.
is.
Mr. Sullivan at the regional level got us off on that foot, right? I mean,
Gluten-free, absolutely delicious oatmeal raisin
God,
cookies.
good.
They
Oh
were-
my God.
they were well enjoyed by my household. If you're watching, Mr. Sullivan, well appreciated.
Okay, great. Okay, anything else before we take a motion?
Can I move to adjourn?
Absolutely. You have a second?
Second.
Great, and I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Demling, start with you.
Demling, aye.
Joanna Cage, aye.
Hazard, aye.
Nakajima, aye.
Ordonez, aye.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Amherst Media.
Thank you.
Thank you, Viviera.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.